Chapter 324. Almost there? What do you mean? Guevara asked. It's a type of magic circle. Hanjin smiled and said to the mountain warriors, carry the boxes down to my room. Yes, sir. The mountain warriors answered and carried the boxes down the stairs. Hanjin stood up slowly. Guevara hesitated for a moment. It was obvious that he wanted to say something, but he didn't. Hanjin noticed Guevara's expression. He turned around and smiled. Is there anything else? Major Domo Gale, he don't be too. Guevara didn't know how to express his thoughts. He had to consider the unity of the elves and also Hanjin's feelings. However, there was a conflict between the two, and it was difficult for him to satisfy both. Hanjin was silent for a moment and said slowly, This world is like a big river with countless undercurrents. I heard that people in this world have no choice. I know what it means, but I don't really understand it. Some things can only be understood after you have experienced it yourself. Guevara didn't interrupt. He just looked at Hanjin quietly. In the legends, it is said that heroes gather together to destroy evil. They are as pure and simple as newborn babies, and when they fight, they are as brave and fierce as beastmen who have been blessed with the berserk spell. Even if they have to sacrifice themselves, they will not hesitate. For justice, they can give up everything, as if they have countless lives to squander. Ha! In reality, such innocent people can only exist in stories. Hanjin slowly tidied up his robe. Where there are people, there will be conflicts and conflicts. This is unavoidable. Distorting and denying human nature is the most foolish thing to do. If we want to eliminate and resolve the conflicts between us, we can only choose between the big and the small. We even need someone to sacrifice himself, just like you. Me? Guevara was stunned. Actually, there are conflicts between you and me. For example, Sunir represents the elves. Hanjin smiled. I wasn't very sensible at that time, but the main reason why I didn't realize the seriousness of this problem was that you were ready to sacrifice yourself, right? Hanjin was right. He was ready. If Hanjin could really get together with Sunir and the elves accepted Hanjin, then he could only quietly retire. I know what Major Domo Gale wants to do. Maybe he can hide it well, but Yelena can't. She left too many traces. Why didn't you refuse? Guevara asked. Because Major Domo Gale was right. If Keely and Silner are really in danger, it's hard for me to take care of them alone. I need help. Hanjin said in a low voice. Just because of this? Guevara couldn't believe it. Hanjin was silent for a moment, then chuckled. To be honest, even though Major Domo Gale is always up to no good, I'm not worried about him. His methods are gentle, and he's also aware of my feelings. I can tolerate him, but compared to Major Domo Gale, I'm more worried about. Jedis. Guevara frowned. Raphael, I think. Jedis is already very tolerant of you, or even of us. I used to think that power would give me the right to do whatever I want, but now I realize that I was wrong. The higher you go, the more things you have to worry about, and the more you can't control yourself. I always have to choose between these and other things. Jedis is the same as me. Hanjin slowly said, The Holy See has been destroyed by Nicholas. The 3 paladins, together with the surviving priests, have come all the way here. What is their purpose? Of course, it is to rebuild the Holy See, and Jedis is the one and only candidate for the Pope. Haha! Are they going to restore the Holy See's past glory, or are they going to follow Jedis' ideas and take the opportunity to get rid of the past and establish a new Holy See? This will not only affect our present, but also our future. Sigh. Guevara sighed. The 3 Holy Knight and Jedis are always together, and they often have secret talks. What are they talking about? Hanjin's eyes showed a mischievous smile. In their minds, I should be a very powerful person. I killed a few giant dragons, fought the Dragon Knight Funing and the Golden Dragon Farragon alone, killed 7 Abyss Demons, and killed Zagund. The Blood Clan's ancestor, Alquite, also died by my hands. How many powerful people can have a battle record comparable to mine? So, the person they're most worried about is me. And that's why you chose to leave at this time? Yes. I left the stage empty and let the three firm holy knight perform to their heart's content. I also let Jedis choose freely. Han Jin said faintly, I will patiently wait for them to make a choice. Even if I find Chi Li and Sylvia tomorrow, I will not return. Now that the weather is cold and the elves are unable to launch an attack, it is a good time for us to integrate internally. Although it is dangerous, it is better than being stabbed in the back in the future. You clearly have the power to influence Jedis. Why did you let him choose freely? Jedis frowned and said, Raphael, by doing this, you are pushing our comrades into the enemy camp. Jedis is the future leader of the Holy See. It is far from enough to influence him, but Jedis is a believer who cannot be controlled by others. Otherwise, Nicholas would not have killed him back then. Han Jin smiled and said, according to Jedis, there used to be only the Pope. When the third Pope was in charge of the Holy See, the power of the Holy See expanded to an unprecedented level. They could even interfere with the appointment and removal of the king. That was how the Pope was born, and the Holy See's authority was above the royal authority. In fact, my request is not high. I just hope that Jedis will stop playing the farce of the King of Kings. It is just a title. What does it mean? It can represent many things. Han Jin said slowly, the Pope is still the Pope. It represents the will, goals, ideals, and desires of all believers. It also proves that Jedis has the ability to control and restrain the believers. Besides, I can't force Jedis into a situation where he can take a step back. Being impatient won't do. As long as he takes a step back, I will naturally have a way to make him take a second and third step back. Of course, I will compensate him accordingly. Guevara was silent for a long time, then said softly, Raphael, you have really matured. Huh? Han Jin laughed. So at this time, I need Majordomo Gale's friendship. What about the future? Do you still need it? This time, it was Han Jin's turn to be silent. After a while, he replied, I am not a cold and heartless person. Guevara also knew that his words were too harsh. He sighed softly and changed the topic. By the way, Kane asked me to ask you. Although Gibran has never walked out of the magic circle, he seems to have noticed the changes in the outside world. He asked me to ask you, what should we do? Are we going to keep Gibran and Julia locked inside? Let them stay inside. It is good for them. Han Jin smiled bitterly. I know, you don't want Julia to be hurt. Guevara stared at Han Jin, but I don't understand. Why do you always care about Morrison, Sisu Gibran, and Julia, but are so harsh on Majordomo Gale? You must know that Majordomo Gale's help to you now and in the future will far exceed theirs. If I didn't have the power and status I have today, would Majordomo Gale even look at me? Han Jin said calmly. Your view is a little naive and a little extreme. Guevara shook his head. What is a complete Raphael? What are you talking about? Han Jin did not understand. This body in front of me and an invisible soul. The combination of the two is the real you, Raphael. This includes many things, such as your appearance, your thoughts, your experience, your sense of right and wrong, your judgment, your knowledge, your power, and so on. Majordomo Gale, who thinks highly of you because of your extraordinary potential, is no different from those female slaves who secretly admire you because of your appearance, status, and power. Female slaves? Han Jin could not help but smile bitterly again. Originally, I didn't want to say it, but since we've talked so much, I can only continue. Guevara's eyes showed that he had experienced the vicissitudes of life. You said that Majordomo Gale deliberately tried to rope you in and befriend you because of your power and status. But in this world, is there such a thing as giving for no reason and no regrets? Han Jin was about to speak when Guevara waved his hand. You guys go down first. Stillberg, Miriam, and the others were dumbfounded. When they heard Guevara's words, they all retreated from the stairs to the cabin, leaving only Han Jin and Guevara on the deck. Let's talk about the person you don't want to talk about the most, Guevara said slowly. Why does Sunir like you? Is there no such reason? If you were really a good-for-nothing Sunir, who is a descendant of God, might help you and take care of you, but she would never like you. Moreover, she would only take care of you for a while, and she would definitely leave. Let's talk about Morrison's and Sassu. Yes, when you met them, you were just a fallen noble. You two got along well at first, but that is definitely not the reason why they are still following you. Morrison's has his own dream of becoming strong, and Sassu's dream is to travel the whole continent. If you had not shown your ability, you two would have been separated a long time ago. Hanjin fell into silence. He just wanted to communicate with Guevara, but the process was out of his control. Guevara became a little emotional, and Guevara's words made sense. Also, why is Yelena following you? Because you not only saved her, but also let her feel your power. Also, why did Gibran, Julia, Winston, and Saxon choose to trust you? Guevara said slowly, the one who has the deepest relationship with you should be Stillberg, but you have a lot of secrets that you can't tell him, right? What will happen after you tell him? From the age of 17 until now, it has been less than 3 years, and you have already become the youngest lord on the continent. Guevara smiled and said, you have such extraordinary abilities. I really can't imagine why you have been so obscure for the past 17 years. Dismark is a very open-minded person, and he knows how to value and protect talents. Actually, you should have become the Lord's Mansion's VIP long ago. Hanjin had to shut his mouth. This was his biggest flaw, and no matter how he tried to explain it, he could not justify it. I am not saying this to find out your secrets. I want to tell you that everything you have, whether it is external or internal, is equally important. Guevara said, of course, I do not deny that there is such a thing as friendship in this world. If you suddenly lose everything, Morrison's and the others will still take care of you and help you like before. You have developed a deep friendship through a long period of suffering. You have always valued and cared for them because of this, right? Hanjin did not answer and only listened quietly. You said that you are not a cold person, but what makes you think that Major Domo Gale is cold? Most people gather around you for the same reason. You have accepted others, but you have rejected Major Domo Gale. From the beginning to the end, you have never given him chance. You have always been wary of him in your heart. You seem to be a lobbyist for Major Domo Gale today, Hanjin said with a smile. A lobbyist? He is not worthy. Guevara shook his head. I just want you to be careful, or at least be fair. These things have nothing to do with me. I can also see that you are wary of Major Domo Gale. Do you really think that Major Domo Gale does not know anything? Hanjin sighed softly. You mentioned a legendary story just now. So let's continue with a story as an example. Guevara paused. In love stories, there's always an emphasis on kindness, purity, or a kind of beauty of the soul. There is always a slander of power, strength, and wealth. This kind of story will resonate with many people. Do you know why? Why? Because power, strength, and wealth are always in the hands of a few people. But this is not important. More importantly, Guevara's lips curled into a sarcastic smile. The beauty of the soul cannot be proven. Power, strength, and wealth cannot be faked. The slightest test will give the game away. But no matter how shameless and wretched a person is, he can still pretend to be a good person. In this aspect, everyone is standing on the same starting line. There is no distinction between high and low. Rather than saying that people like the beauty of the soul, it is better to say that they are pursuing a kind of absolute fairness. You are wrong. Hanjin shook his head. At least the beauty of the soul will not change with the passage of time. I used to like Sunir, not because she could protect me, not because she was a descendant of God. It was because she made me feel warm. And Sunir, she likes you because you can give her a future. Of course, there are other reasons as well. Guevara smiled. The beauty of the soul will not change with the passage of time. Will it really not change? Hanjin was about to speak, but he was once again interrupted by Guevara. Do you believe that Sunir will not change, or does Sunir believe that you will not change? The Raphael now and the Raphael 3 years ago, have you really not changed? That is because what we're talking about, the reason is not important. What is important is the result. What is the result? Sunir has changed, and so have you. Guevara said, some people love flowers, while others love shiny gold coins. People always think that the former is elegant, while the latter is vulgar. In fact, there's not much difference between them. Start a person who loves flowers for a few days, then throw him out on the street, and he will immediately love gold coins madly. You are twisting words and forcing logic. Han Jin smiled bitterly. What I want to say is that because of your strength and immeasurable potential, you have gained the attention of others. This is normal. You should feel honored, and don't be hostile to Majordomo Gale. Although I don't know him, but looking at his attitude towards Yelena, he is just a very ordinary old man. He has his own emotions, his own wishes, and his own protection. Guevara said softly, "At least you should give him a chance to get close to you. I don't want to force myself." "Who dares to force you?" Guevara laughed. "I know you were talking about Yelena, but you can reject her. Remember, Majordomo Gale is the one who needs our help, not the other way around. If I am not wrong, Grand Duke Solomon has suffered a lot of injuries because of his battles when he was young. His current condition is not good, even though he is not yet 50 years old. Otherwise, Majordomo Gale would not be in such a hurry to seek shelter for the descendants of Grand Duke Solomon." "You mean?" Han Jin was stunned. "You still don't understand?" Guevara looked a little helpless. Majordomo Gale's first choice is the fastest and most stable way, but this does not mean that he has no other way. You have become very smart in other things, but when it comes to the relationship between a man and a woman, you are hopelessly stupid. How can I be compared to you?" Han Jin shrugged his shoulders. "I heard that you had more than 10 wives when you were young." Before he could finish, Han Jin quickly shut his mouth. Guevara's wife and children had all died in the hands of the Silver Pegasus Regiment. Just like how Sunir was his pain, he should not mention this. "You can reject Yelena, but you can't deliberately alienate her like you are now," Guevara said softly, as if he did not take Han Jin's words to heart. "Now you are the Lord, and you have the initiative. Jed's, Majordomo Gale, and I are more or less your subordinates. Compared to you, he doesn't want to anger you. You rejected Yelena and showed some goodwill, so he naturally has to find a way to come up with a new suggestion. Do you understand now?" Han Jin pondered for a moment and nodded. He understood Guevara's meaning. Even if he rejected Yelena, it did not mean that the two sides would break up. Of course, he had to show goodwill at the right time. "Think about it yourself, but don't hurt Yelena too much. She's a good girl," Guevara sighed. "At least in my eyes, she is much better than Sunir." Chapter 325. After taking off the cork, Han Jin raised his head and drank all the dragon blood in the bottle. In fact, it was difficult to preserve dragon blood. The energy contained in the blood would evaporate in a short time. In total, Han Jin had obtained 3 chances to absorb energy from the dragon's blood. However, due to specific reasons, a large part of the energy had been wasted. Now, it was different from the past. After occupying the Holy Crown City, almost all the talents cultivated by Dismark had been accepted. Han Jin, Guevara, and the others had destroyed the center of Dismark's rule in an instant. The scale of the battle was controlled within a certain range, and all kinds of talents were protected. There were hundreds of mature magicians in the Magic Legion and about 700 or 800 students in the Magic Academy. It was a piece of cake for them to take out the dragon blood and reprocess the corks of the bottles. Han Jin did not even need to say anything. His subordinates would naturally find a way to deal with it. Although Han Jin had just told Guevara that the higher he went, the more he would feel helpless. However, he could not deny that power also brought a lot of convenience. After drinking a bottle of dragon blood, Han Jin sat there and closed his eyes to rest so that he could absorb the energy better. After a while, he took out another bottle of dragon blood. This cycle took about 2 or 3 minutes. He had been trying to speed up the absorption of energy. However, when he finished absorbing all the dragon blood in the boxes, it was already late at night. Han Jin meditated for more than an hour before he slowly opened his eyes and relaxed his body. Perhaps he was destined to form an indissoluble bond with the dragons. In the past 3 years, he had been practicing hard, but the actual progress was very limited. There were 3 leaps in his strength, all of which were caused by the dragon blood. Now it was the fourth time. Han Jin sighed softly. A layer of faint golden light flashed in his eyes, which added a bit of majesty to him. This somewhat contradicted his natural temperament. His tranquil temperament always unconsciously diluted the majesty he exuded. Han Jin took out a few magic crystals from his space ring. Compared to the dragon's blood he had just absorbed, these magic crystals contained a pitiful amount of energy. However, this was something he had to do every day. After all, dragon's blood was hard to obtain, and magic crystals were his foundation. After swallowing the magic crystals, Han Jin adjusted his breath for a moment, opened the door, and walked out. The corridor was quiet. It was already late, and most people had returned to their rooms to rest. Han Jin walked along the corridor and gently pressed on a wall. A door appeared on the wall, and the next moment, Han Jin disappeared inside. Inside the door, the sky was filled with dancing starlight. A white light and a black smoke were chasing each other and fighting. Hale's complacent and arrogant laughter was particularly ear-piercing. He could easily control the array. This was his territory, and the angel of light that was fighting with him was greatly restrained. Han Jin's order was to weaken the angel of light's fighting strength as much as possible. Otherwise, he would have scattered the angel of light long ago. Seeing Han Jin's figure appear from the starlight, Hale and the angel of light stopped at the same time. No more fighting, no more fighting. I'll let you go today. Ha! Hale laughed strangely a few times. His body suddenly turned into an extremely small black bead and shot towards Han Jin like lightning. When he reached Han Jin's side, he instantly returned to his original form. The angel of light was unwilling to let Hale go. He raised his sword of light and chased after him. Han Jin frowned and pointed his sword finger. A green light shot out and hit the angel of light. With a loud bang, the angel of light's body burst into pieces and turned into countless drifting light spots, flying towards the glorious pendant suspended in midair. His strength is getting weaker and weaker, Han Jin said indifferently. In the past, if he wanted the angel of light to return to the glorious pendant, he had to borrow the power of the array. Now he only needed to lightly hit it. Yes, master. I wouldn't be afraid, even if there were a few more angels of light like this. Hale said proudly. His body didn't look much different from before. However, as the starlight flickered, various faces of different shapes appeared and disappeared on his body. It looked extremely eerie. This meant that he hadn't completely absorbed the tens of thousands of evil spirits. Han Jin shook his head. He knew Hale's personality. He was a guy who liked to brag. However, if a few angels of light appeared here, Hale would definitely run away faster than anyone else. Unless Han Jin ordered Hale to fight to the death. Han Jin waved his hand. The glorious pendant floating in the air slowly flew towards him and landed in his palm. Han Jin stared at the glorious pendant and muttered to himself. The glorious pendant contained a vast amount of light energy. Although it had been refined by him, he still couldn't completely control it. More accurately, he could summon the angels of light at any time. However, the angels of light had their own consciousness. They could fight for him or not. If Hale revealed his true form, the angels of light would reject all orders and attack Hale with all their might. They wouldn't be under his control at all. This gave him a headache. Back then, when Zagund wanted to obtain the glorious pendant, he should have had his own way to resolve the conflict. Unfortunately, Zagund was already dead. He couldn't receive any enlightenment. Perhaps the best way was to completely erase the angels of light's consciousness. However, he couldn't do that. When the angels of light received more than a certain amount of damage, they would turn into countless drifting light spots and return to the glorious pendant. Master, you seem to have something on your mind? Hale observed Han Jin's expression from aside. What could I possibly have on my mind? Han Jin smiled and wore the glorious pendant around his neck. Master, you want to take this away? Hale seemed a little disappointed. He hadn't had enough fun yet. Yes, I'm going out tomorrow. You have to accompany me. Han Jin nodded. Really? Hale was overjoyed. Nonsense. Hale's body suddenly turned into a black bead and scattered in the starry sky. Han Jin couldn't be bothered with Hale. He took out the immortal binding rope from his spatial ring and shook it in the air. The immortal binding rope was like the glorious pendant from before. Han Jin's hands quickly formed a seal. Streams of true samadhi fire were released one after another, all of them exploding on the immortal binding rope. Last time when he killed the green dragon, he used the immortal binding rope to bind the green dragon's 2 hind legs. However, the green dragon actually released its dragon's breath in a frenzy, causing the immortal binding rope to be severely damaged. This time, he didn't know what he would encounter when he went out. A soul-devouring pearl was far from enough. An additional magic treasure was an additional layer of protection. Hale returned to Han Jin's side at an unknown time. He nervously observed Han Jin's every move. In terms of Dao, Hale could be considered to have reached the entry level. However, the more he learned, the more he understood his own shallowness. This wasn't magic, but its system was extremely grand. It was even more complicated than the current nature magic, abyss magic, necromancy magic, and so on combined. Therefore, he didn't want to miss any opportunity to learn. Han Jin's speed of forming seals became faster and faster. His 10 fingertips had already turned into balls of afterimages. Countless talismans appeared in the air one after another, even forming 2 streams that continuously flowed onto the immortal binding rope. The immortal binding rope gradually emitted a faint light. Its long body was also constantly twisting. It was like a greedy snake that would never be satisfied, desperately absorbing the power of the talismans. The talismans fell on the immortal binding rope, instantly turning into extremely fine patterns that couldn't be seen by the naked eye. They merged into the depths of the immortal binding rope. Soon after, new patterns would cover it up, merge again, and cover it up again. The immortal binding rope also gradually thickened. About half an hour later, Han Jin's forehead was covered with tiny beads of sweat. It had taken him a long time to make this immortal binding rope. Now, he was able to repair the damage on the rope in one go with the support of nearly 100 Xian's vital energy. If it had been half a year ago, he wouldn't have been able to do it. Go! Han Jin fiercely waved his hand. Following his gesture, the light on the immortal binding rope dissipated with a boom. Even the flashing stars around Han Jin flew far away. The strange thing was that although the stars could be seen moving rapidly, they couldn't escape his vision. It was as if this place was infinitely big. Han Jin reached out and grabbed the immortal binding rope. After observing it for a moment, he put it back into the space ring and smiled. Did you see it clearly? I didn't see it, Master. Harley subconsciously shouted, like a child who had secretly eaten candy and instinctively denied it. Little did he know that if Han Jin didn't want him to observe, how could he have stayed here all this time? You didn't see it? Han Jin didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Only then did Harley realize how ridiculous his disguise was. He laughed dryly and changed the topic. Master, Lady Yelena is here to see you. Han Jin's mind moved slightly, and an image appeared in his mind. Yelena was carrying a big bag and was walking back and forth outside his room. After walking back and forth for countless times, Yelena finally stopped. She raised her hand and was about to knock on the door when she thought of something. Her hand dropped slowly, and then she walked back and forth outside the door. How long has she been here? Han Jin asked softly. I don't know, Master. I just realized, Harley replied. Han Jin reached out and patted Harley's head. Harley involuntarily turned into a round bead. Then Han Jin put the bead on the bracelet on his left wrist, which was specially made for Harley. When Yelena turned her back to the room, he opened the door and walked out. With a ground-shrinking spell, Han Jin had already crossed the distance of dozens of meters and appeared behind Yelena. Yelena had just turned around. She had been thinking about something and was startled by the sudden appearance of a person in front of her, causing her to drop the big bundle in her hand. Han Jin reached out and caught the big bag. He smiled and said, Yelena, are you looking for me? Guevara's words were still in his ears. He could reject Yelena, but he couldn't alienate her, and he couldn't hurt her. However, what he wanted to do was up to him. In fact, Yelena's problem was more troublesome than the angel of light in the glorious pendant. Yes, Yelena forced herself to calm down and then smiled. Last time I saw you wearing the knight's shield, it was very ugly. Who would wear a magic robe and a shield? It gave people a strange feeling, so Hogan and I used the remaining dragon scales to make a set of soft armor for you. Since you're leaving tomorrow, I'll send the soft armor to you and see if it fits. If it doesn't, I'll change it. Hogan? Why didn't he tell me? I didn't let him. We wanted to give you a surprise. Yelena said, while secretly looking at Han Jin's expression. Han Jin sighed in his heart. After all, Yelena was a magus and a well-known top-grade professional. At this moment, she was as timid as a frightened rabbit. Was Han Jin really worthy of Yelena's attention? If it was outside, no matter where Yelena went, she would be respected. However, on the God of War, she was just an ordinary, helpless girl. Come in and talk. Han Jin reached out and pushed open the door to his room. The two entered the room one after the other. Han Jin closed the door and put the big bag on the table. When did you start making dragon scale armor for me? Last time. Yelena suddenly closed her mouth. Last time when you saw me burn the magic robe? Han Jin suddenly remembered. Yelena nodded and shook her head awkwardly. Finally, she forced a smile and said, Do you want to try it first? Okay. Han Jin nodded without hesitation. Yelena's expression suddenly became excited. She grabbed the big bag first, opened it in a hurry, and took out 2 pieces of shoulder armor. Han Jin had never worn armor before because it was too troublesome. No matter if it was soft armor, leather armor, or heavy armor, they were all made up of various parts. The steps to wear them were tedious, and sometimes he had to rely on the help of others to wear them neatly. Swordsmen, knights, and other close combat professionals had to wear armor. This couldn't be helped. It was not enough to rely only on combat energy. With the addition of suitable armor, the two complemented each other, and the defensive power could be increased several times. When he had obtained the dragon scale armor by chance, Sunir had tried to persuade Han Jin. However, it took too long to make a set of dragon scale armor. Moreover, he thought that Morrison's and the others needed protection more than him. As time passed and Han Jin's strength increased too quickly, everyone gradually forgot about Han Jin. No one mentioned him again. From the beginning to the end, Han Jin had been very cooperative. As the number of pieces of armor increased, his temperament also changed. Han Jin had a very handsome face and a medium build. He was not as burly as Morrison's, but he was much stronger than Gibran, Kane, and the others. He had a strong back and a thin waist, and his muscles were firm and elastic. His shoulders were broad and thick, and his legs were long and slender, just like an agile cheetah. He was an excellent clothes hanger, and even the most ordinary clothes would not look bad on him. What's more, this was the leather armor that Yelena had carefully made. Later, she had asked several famous tailors in the Holy Crown City to cut it carefully. If it was put on the market, it would definitely fetch a high price. Han Jin looked very elegant in his magic robe, but when he put on the armor, he gave people a feeling of heroic spirit. In this regard, Yelena understood the psychology of men very well. There was nothing fancy. The leather armor was cut and fitted, simple and ancient. The whole body was dark blue, and it had a steady and vicissitude temperament. The dragon scale shone beautifully under the candlelight, but it did not lose its luxuriousness. Finally, Yelena put on a fiery red cloak for Han Jin. This was like a finishing touch, and Han Jin's figure suddenly became vivid and vivid. Steadiness and bravery, vicissitudes and vitality. They complemented each other and set off each other. If Han Jin walked on the street in a robe, he would not attract the attention of others. At most, he would attract the attention of some infatuated girls behind him. But when he put on the armor, he suddenly became valiant and showed off his ability. In fact, knights and swordsmen did not wear cloaks for the sake of looking good. For example, Han Jin's cloak was made of 3 layers of dragon scales. Together with the leather armor, there were 4 layers of dragon scales in total. Its defensive power was far greater than that of a giant dragon. If someone attacked Han Jin from behind, Even if Han Jin stood still and did not release any Taoist magic, it would be impossible for anyone to hurt Han Jin except for top-grade and super-grade professionals. Where is your Lion King's shield? Yelena did not expect the effect to be so good and asked with a smile. Han Jin took out the Lion King's shield from his space ring. Yelena borrowed the Lion King's shield and put it on Han Jin's left arm. Then, she fastened the shield with the armor belt. Han Jin faced the mirror and waved his left arm casually. It was indeed much better. Wearing a magic robe and the Lion King's shield was strange, and the appearance was far inferior to this set of leather armor. Yelena took out an empty scabbard and carefully inserted it into Han Jin's back. The opening of the scabbard was slanted to the back of Han Jin's shoulder. There is still something missing here. Han Jin was very cooperative today. He pointed his sword finger, and a green light flashed in the air and turned into a long sword, which was inserted into the scabbard accurately. Beautiful, so beautiful. This is the hero of legends. Yelena was overjoyed. She looked at Han Jin for a while, and then looked at the mirror for a while. Hero. Han Jin didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He didn't care at all whether he would become a hero of legends or not. The only reason he cooperated was so that he wouldn't hurt Yelena. What do you think? Yelena asked seriously and nervously. Very good, Han Jin said from the bottom of his heart. Although he never paid attention to his appearance, no one would refuse to make himself look better. Yelena smiled from the bottom of her heart. Her smile was satisfied and joyful. The first thing that smiled was her eyes. After her eyes narrowed into a mischievous crescent, her nose wrinkled slightly, and then the corners of her mouth rose. Her smile was not revealed, but bloomed like a flower blooming in the spring breeze, bright and beautiful. Then I'll go tell them that they can rest now. Yelena seemed to have realized that she had lost her composure. She hurriedly turned around and ran out of the door. Wait! Han Jin hurriedly called out. What's wrong? Yelena stopped. You don't want me to sleep in this, do you? Han Jin pointed at the soft armor on his body and said helplessly, China Mobile is too unscrupulous. Today, my brother went to China Mobile and found out what those inexplicable charges on his phone were. They sent you a text message to invite you to open a service, but you didn't reply. They took it as your acquiescence and opened the service for you. Was this still reasonable? My brother's a good talker, but at that time, he was so angry that he couldn't speak for a long time. For example, I'm selling peanuts on the street for 1,000 yuan per kilogram. I just have to shout, and everyone who hears me has to buy my peanuts. Is this a robbery or a business transaction? Chapter 3:26. Snowflakes began to fall again, and the world became a vast expanse of whiteness. The wild northwest wind blew the snow into the air, and the visibility became very low. No matter how good a person's eyesight was, they could only see things 300 or 400 meters away. The gray sky and the vast expanse of white snow made people feel an inexplicable sense of oppression. The forest was already covered in a layer of silver. From time to time, there would be branches that couldn't bear the weight of the snow, making cracking sounds as they fell to the ground. More than a dozen elves were huddled in the valley, hiding from the unbearable wind and snow. They huddled close to each other, forming a small circle. Of course, the ones who were surrounded in the center were female elves. Elegance was definitely not something that only humans could possess. As a matter of fact, anyone who had lived in a world of ice and snow knew that it wasn't that cold when it was snowing. It was only when the weather became clear that it was truly cold. However, to the elves, this weather was no different from hell. Their faces had turned blue from the cold, and their bodies were shivering like a flock of poor cold signal birds. More than a dozen silver pegasi and a handsome unicorn surrounded the circle. The silver pegasi was also very weak. Compared to the unicorn, the level 10 unicorn was the most adaptable. However, it also seemed to be a little restless. It shook its head from time to time to get rid of the melted ice water. Every time it shook its head, the silver pegasi and the elves nearby would be in trouble. The cold water droplets turned into countless silver lights and hit their bodies in leather armor. making dull and crisp sounds. However, no one dared to scold the unicorn. Outside the circle, an elf stood there silently, looking at the sky with a gloomy gaze. He was a powerful warrior, so of course, he wouldn't want to squeeze together with his subordinates for warmth. However, the dancing snowflakes wouldn't treat him well just because he was a powerful warrior. The wind and snow mercilessly whipped his face, body, and neck. There was a price to pay for acting. More than 10 cracks had already appeared on the elf's lips, and drops of blood of various sizes were oozing out. However, his figure still looked very determined. Among the races on the Pan-continent, the orcs were the best at resisting the harsh weather, and the elves were undoubtedly the weakest. Coupled with their lack of reproductive ability, the fall of the Elven Empire was not a coincidence. "Sir, I don't think we can reach Fort Maxine. Let's go back," one of the elves said bravely. "That's right, my lord. The snowstorm is too heavy," another elf said. "Who will be responsible for the delay?" The elf standing outside the circle replied coldly. The elves in the circle fell silent. It would be pointless to make things too clear. "You're the leader, so of course you're responsible." However, no one was willing to be the first to do so. "What is it?" "I'll take responsibility, okay?" a strange voice said. There was a sinister tone to the voice, which made the elves' hair stand on end. They looked around, but couldn't find the person who had spoken. "Speak, what's the matter?" the voice asked again. A female elf in the inner circle realized that the sound seemed to be coming from below her. She hurriedly pushed her companion away and looked down. She saw a black, shiny pearl slowly swimming between her legs. The sound was coming from that pearl. "Here!" the female elf screamed and reached out to grab the pearl. Unexpectedly, the pearl suddenly moved and shot towards her palm like a bolt of lightning. With a bang, the black pearl pierced through the female elf's palm and continued to fly upwards. It shot into the female elf's jaw and came out from the top of her head. Blood splattered everywhere, and a large piece of the female elf's skull was torn off. Her body leaned weakly against her companion. "Huh!" The bead flew up into the air and turned into a cloud of smoke. Harley's figure appeared in the smoke and laughed strangely. Then, his figure quickly collapsed into the middle and condensed into a bead again. Then, he flew down again. The elf who had been chosen by Harley hurriedly waved his longbow, but Harley's speed suddenly increased. The pearl shot into the elf's forehead and came out from the back of his head. It didn't stop there and shot into the chest of the next elf. "Go!" the elf leader shouted and rushed towards his unicorn. He could already see that this terrifying enemy wasn't someone that their small squad of elves could deal with. Moreover, his mission wasn't to fight, but to send the news back to Fort Maxine. "Everyone, scatter and run. Quick!" The elves seemed to have woken up from dream. They all rushed towards their mounts and fled in all directions. However, due to the snowstorm, the silver Pegasus was almost completely frozen, and its speed was greatly reduced. Harley, on the other hand, wasn't affected in the slightest. He came and went like lightning, and amidst bursts of strange laughter, he chased after the fleeing elves. The elf leader didn't even dare to look back. He desperately urged his unicorn to escape into the distance. After running for about 600 or 700 meters, the elf leader suddenly saw a figure in front of him. The figure was wrapped in an arrogant red cloak. It fluttered slowly in the wild northwest wind like a heavy and arrogant flame. The elf leader's eyes narrowed. He then took out his longbow and pulled out an arrow. Although his fingers were frozen stiff, his movements were still very fast. 3 arrows were shot out in succession towards the figure in the distance. But just as the arrows were shot out, the figure in the distance suddenly disappeared. Then a red light bloomed in front of him, dyeing his world red. For example, she also liked animals very much. When Morrisons wanted to step on the little Thunderbird, she almost went crazy on the spot. Of course, her attitude towards Morrisons was different from her attitude toward Hanjin. At this moment, no matter how sorry she was, she could only watch. Hanjin walked towards the unicorn. Yelena hurriedly cried out in a pleading tone, "Raphael, don't hit it. It's so pitiful." "It's okay. I know what's important. Han Jin smiled and continued to walk towards the unicorn. The unicorn lowered its head, its horns still facing Han Jin, but it didn't dare to attack recklessly anymore. It just limped back. After retreating a dozen steps, the unicorn seemed to know that it couldn't escape, so it resigned itself and stopped moving. It let out a low, childlike cry, as if it was begging for something. Han Jin stood in front of the unicorn and looked at it. At first, the unicorn was still observing Han Jin, but later, its head lowered until it almost touched the ground. Then, it used its horn to unconsciously move in the snow. Bit by bit, the horn approached Han Jin. It gently touched Han Jin's calf, then ran away as if it had been electrocuted. Yelena, come ride it. Han Jin turned his head. Ride the unicorn? No way. Yelena said, unicorns are very proud. Some elves are born with the ability to communicate with unicorns, but even so, it's very, very difficult to tame a unicorn. I'm not only a magician, I'm also a beast tamer. Han Jin smiled. Really? Yelena didn't believe him. Beast tamers often treated their magical beasts as their own children. How could they be as violent as Han Jin? Why would I lie to you? Han Jin laughed. Are little gold lightning and the others disobedient? Right? Yelena was convinced. Han Jin had tamed more than 100 thunderbirds, so taming a unicorn shouldn't be a problem. Come. Han Jin waved his hand. Yelena slowly walked toward the unicorn. When she got close, she slowly reached out her hand and tried to stroke the unicorn, but the unicorn suddenly avoided her hand and turned its head, stabbing Yelena's wrist with its sharp horn. Han Jin slapped the unicorn's head with his palm. The unicorn screamed and spun around before kneeling down on the ground. Although Han Jin didn't use much strength, at least the unicorn wouldn't admit it. Not to mention that its head had been severely shaken. It struggled to stand up, but couldn't control its body no matter how hard it tried. Don't hit it. Yelena was anxious and couldn't help but grab Han Jin's arm tightly. The unicorn is a 10th level magical beast. It won't be killed so easily. Han Jin smiled and reached out to grab the unicorn's horn. With a strong pull, he lifted the unicorn up. The unicorn, which had been incomparably handsome just a moment ago, was now swaying. Its body was still trembling, and blood was oozing out of its mouth. This is enough. Ride it up, Han Jin said. Yelena tentatively reached out and gently stroked the unicorn's back. The unicorn had become completely obedient and didn't resist. Be good. Don't make a fuss, or you'll be beaten again. Yelena's eyes were full of distress. She then cast a levitation spell and slowly flew to the unicorn's back. This time, the unicorn didn't move, allowing Yelena to land on its back. How is it? My beast taming technique is very useful, right? Han Jin smiled. Yelena couldn't help but bite her lips, but she didn't refute. You think I'm very violent? No, not at all. Yelena hurriedly denied. The shortest distance between 2 points is always a straight line. Sometimes violence is the most effective and direct way to solve a problem, just like now. Han Jin slightly raised the corner of his mouth, giving off a feeling of ridicule. Especially for those elves who think they are infallible. I really can't think of anything more effective than violence. Yelena lowered her head. The word Sunir had become a taboo. Prudence had attacked the Bite Man after the wedding ceremony. There were tens of thousands of elven prisoners in the Holy Crown City, and every one of them could testify. In the past, she could still persuade Han Jin with excuses such as Sunir wouldn't do that. But now, she had nothing to say. A black bead shot over from afar, exploded when it got close, turning into a grayish-black skeleton. Master, it's all clean over there. Hale shouted proudly. What did you find out? Han Jin turned around. They should have something very important. I think they're going to the Beatman's Fort Maxine. What's the matter? I don't know. Where are the elves? Han Jin frowned. All killed. Hale finally realized that he had been too carried away and made a big mistake. Seeing Han Jin frowning more and more, Harley panicked. He glanced around and saw an elf on the ground moving. He was overjoyed. Master, there's a living one. Oh my God, there's really a living one. Before Han Jin could say anything, Harley had already flown towards the elf. After a long struggle, he finally flipped the elf over with his half-materialized bone claws. There was a big hole in the elf's chest, and some broken bones had pierced through his muscles and even his leather armor. His chest was not moving up and down, so it was hard to tell whether he was dead or alive. Seeing that the elf's injuries were so serious, Harley panicked even more. He reached out and slapped the elf's face with his bone claws as he muttered, "Great God of light! Bah! Great God of death hammers! I beg you, please don't take this poor elf's life. I beg you, just wait for a while." As if hearing Harley's prayer, the elf slowly opened his eyes and looked at Harley's face. He paused for a moment, then spat out a mouthful of blood. The elf's 4 limbs fell to the side, and he trembled a little before he stopped moving. UF asterisk cur. Harley was so angry that he cursed. When he saw the elf open her eyes, he thought that he had really received the grace of the god of death, Hamas. Who would have thought that the elf would die in the blink of an eye? From fear to extreme joy, and then to extreme sorrow. The rapid change of emotions was a test of one's inner self-control, and this was what Harley lacked. Han Jin walked over and looked at the dead elf. He glared at Harley. "Where did you say they were going?" "They were going to the Beatman's, Fort Maxine. Fort Maxine is now the headquarters of the elves. It seems that they're going to do something big." Han Jin looked around. "Harley, where's Fort Maxine?" "Master, it's over there." Harley pointed. "We're going in the opposite direction." "Why?" "This is a plain, and there are no roads. The elves came here because they wanted to get to Fort Maxine as quickly as possible," Han Jin said calmly. "I understand," Yelena interrupted. "Raphael, you just said that the shortest distance between 2 points is always a straight line. Since the elves wanted to get to Fort Maxine as quickly as possible, they must have come from the opposite direction." "Yes." Han Jin nodded. "With the silver Pegasus and unicorn, they didn't have to follow the main road." "Master, you are so wise," Harley exclaimed. "Shut up. Use your brain next time," Han Jin said angrily. "If you keep fooling around like this, don't come out." After that, Han Jin walked toward the plane. Harley was so scared that he kept quiet out of fear and followed behind Han Jin obediently. The unicorn didn't even need Yelena's order and walked on its own, limping behind them. A level 10 holy beast had a certain level of intelligence. It knew that it hadn't been beaten to death because it was carrying a person on its back, so it didn't dare to fall behind. Yelena looked at Han Jin's fluttering cloak and suddenly whispered, "Raphael, you should come too." "What?" Han Jin turned around. Yelena's voice was too soft, and even with his sharp ears, he couldn't hear her clearly. "I said you." Yelena gathered her courage and said resolutely, "You should come too." "No need, I like to walk." Han Jin casually found an excuse, but after saying it, he realized how lame it was. "Oh." Yelena lowered her head and didn't say anything else. Chapter 327. "Let's do it here." Han Jin stopped and pointed at a colonel. It was getting dark, and the wind and snow were getting heavier and heavier. It was impossible for Keely and Silner to continue their journey in such a bad weather, as their strength was too weak to do so. "Master, watch me." Harley, who had made a mistake, was determined to show off. He rushed into the valley, his body gradually expanding, and then he began to spin rapidly. The grayish-black smoke turned into a small tornado, sweeping up the snow and countless tiny grains of sand and dust on the ground. The ground within a radius of a few dozen meters became very clean, leaving only some withered grass with strong roots dancing wildly in the tornado. Harley flew into the air with the sand and stones. Yelena jumped off the unicorn and released a magic shield at the right time, surrounding the ground about a dozen square meters, isolating it from the snow and cold wind. Then, Yelena walked in the magic shield and shook off the snow on her body. She took out a green carpet from her space ring and carefully spread it on the ground. Then, she knelt there and glanced at Han Jin from the corner of her eyes. Although Yelena didn't say anything, Han Jin knew what she meant. If he refused, it would be too pretentious and inconsistent with his established principles. Hanjin paused and slowly walked into the magic shield. Yelena hurriedly greeted him and brushed off the snow on Hanjin's body. This heartwarming scene made Harley, who was descending from the sky, feel very conflicted. If only he and Hanjin were the only two people on this adventure. As someone who had learned Taoist magic, he had no doubt about Hanjin's strength. He also absolutely believed that his master would become a legend. In the future, when someone talked about this journey, he would definitely be half of the main character. Now that Yelena was involved, the focus would be on her, and he would be redundant. Of course, a love story was more interesting than the feelings of an undead creature. The unicorn also slowly walked into the magic shield. It habitually shook its body, and countless water droplets flew out and splashed on Yelena and Hanjin. This guy is so naughty. Yelena giggled. She hurriedly took out a silk handkerchief and wiped the water off her face. Then, she saw that Hanjin's face was also full of water droplets. She held back her laughter and helped Hanjin wipe it off. Hanjin wasn't as good-tempered as Yelena. He looked at the unicorn quietly. The unicorn was now terrified of Hanjin, and when it saw Hanjin looking at it, it began to tremble again. Bit by bit, it lay on the ground and whined softly. "All right, stop scaring it," Yelena said coquettishly. Hanjin looked away. He didn't think that unicorns were cute. If he could, he would rather choose magic crystals. Yelena knelt on the carpet again and took out a small green pillow from her space ring. She put it aside and then took out another pillow, but where to put this pillow was a big problem. Yelena hugged the pillow in a daze. She wanted to put it down, but after a moment of hesitation, she hugged it back. After repeating this several times, she finally put the pillow next to the small pillow. This. Harley couldn't help but cry out. Yelena immediately blushed and grabbed the pillow as if she had been electrocuted. After hesitating for a long time, she put the pillow aside. This time, the distance between the two pillows was more than a foot. After doing this, Yelena didn't dare to look up at Hanjin. She took out an exquisitely crafted plate from her space ring and then laid out the food one by one. There was bread, sausages, and all kinds of seasonings in small bottles. It was a dazzling array. Hanjin was a little stunned. "Your space ring contains all these things?" "Yes." Yelena still didn't dare to look up. "Why haven't I seen you take them out before?" Hanjin couldn't help but shake his head. His space ring was filled with necessities. In his opinion, it was too wasteful to carry these things around. "I didn't carry them before either." Yelena said, "But how can it be the same now? How is it different?" Now I'm the only one taking care of you." Yelena's voice became lower and lower as she spoke. Hanjin was speechless and kept silent. Sunir and Yelena were very different. Because of their different races, their inherited culture and traditions were also very different. Sunir was an elf, and the elves believed in the goddess of nature. There was no need to discuss her gender. Therefore, within the elves, the status of females was no less than that of males, and was even slightly higher than that of males. This also allowed Sunir to develop an independent character. Therefore, after Sunir talked with Great Elder Angela, she immediately hid in the illusionary realm of the temple and used this non-violent and non-cooperative method to fight against the entire Senate and even all the elves. Although this method was a bit negative, it was the limit of Sunir. She couldn't just shoot her own people and force her way out, could she? Or kill herself on the spot if she couldn't break out. If it were Yelena, she might not have the courage to do what Sunir did. In human society, the status of females was always lower than that of males. Although females also had complete inheritance rights, they were always ranked behind males. In fact, this could be seen from the social structure of isolated Cliff City. Human male mercenaries were responsible for hunting magical beasts, while females were responsible for housework. There weren't many female warriors like Sylvia. Not only warriors, but in all magic academies, the male students were generally higher than the female students. Only in the profession of priests were females in the majority. However, what was interesting was that most of the high-level priests were men. There were only 2 archbishops in the Roman Curia, and both of them were men. In the College of Cardinals, men accounted for more than 90% of them. Hundreds of popes had been born in the Roman Curia, and all of them were men. The behavior of parents often had a huge and subtle influence on their children. Yelena's father, Grand Duke Solomon, had always maintained an absolute dominance. In Yelena's mind, her mother was the most perfect woman in the world, and she was also a role model for her to follow. Therefore, whatever her mother did, she would do the same. Furthermore, Majordomo Gale had repeatedly pressured her to win over Han Jin and befriend Han Jin. The subtle influence and pressure from her childhood made her take care of Han Jin like a maid. She was even willing to compromise. Even if Han Jin made some excessive requests or said some outrageous words, she would still accept them. This had nothing to do with her personal strength, but it was all due to the influence of culture and tradition. However, this was something Sunir could not do. No matter how strong Han Jin was or how high his status was, she would always put Han Jin in an equal position with her, or at least in terms of personality. In the face of danger, she could die for Han Jin, but she would not allow herself to become a submissive slave who only wanted to please others. After a rather rich picnic, Han Jin sat cross-legged on the carpet, while Yelena took the plates out of the carpet and used the method of condensing water elements to wash the tableware. Perhaps it was her first time doing this kind of work, or perhaps it was because her hands and feet were not very flexible due to the cold, but she was clumsy. Several times, the tableware fell to the ground and had to be washed again. After a long time, she finally cleaned the tableware. Then, she returned to the carpet and sat on her knees. For a cultivator, sitting cross-legged was a very normal posture, but in this world, Han Jin's posture was very strange and somewhat unsightly. At least, Yelena would not try such a licentious posture. Only then did Han Jin notice that Yelena's face, nose, and fingers were red from the cold. When they set off in the early morning, they were flying in the air, but then it snowed heavily and visibility was too low. They could not see the ground at all, and flying in the air was a waste of energy, so Han Jin and Yelena landed on the ground. In order to deal with unexpected situations, they had to cherish every bit of energy. Han Jin's approach was certainly not wrong, but it was somewhat inappropriate to use his standards on a woman, especially a magician. However, Yelena was very obedient. When Han Jin asked her to ride the unicorn, she did. When Han Jin asked her to conserve her mana, she withdrew her magic shield. In the overwhelming snowstorm, she suffered a lot. Yelena hurriedly jumped up and went behind Han Jin to untie Han Jin's cloak. Forget it, just sleep like this. Now that this is the territory of the elves, what if something happens? Han Jin said. He didn't care about the defense provided by the leather armor, but now he realized the importance of this set of equipment. At least it provided a perfect excuse. Oh, then I'll sleep like this. Yelena didn't think too much about it. She thought that Han Jin's caution was right. Then, Yelena returned to her side and slowly lay down on the pillow. Han Jin turned his head and took the opportunity to look around and put a few magic crystals into his mouth. Besides Harley, this was his and Sunir's secret. Even Stillberg didn't know about it, and he wasn't going to share it with anyone. Although he knew that Sunir would definitely leak his secret to the elves after her betrayal, it was one thing to find out through other channels, and another thing to take the initiative to tell them. He would never give his heart to anyone, including Yelena, in front of him. After swallowing the magic crystals, Han Jin closed his eyes and began to rest. But just as he closed his eyes, he suddenly heard a squeak. He quickly opened his eyes and saw Yelena biting her lips hard. Seeing Han Jin looking at her, Yelena hurriedly closed her eyes, but her long eyelashes were still trembling. At the same time, her body was trembling. After holding it in for a while, she finally couldn't control herself and let out a low laugh. Han Jin didn't know what was going on. It seemed that no one was joking. What made Yelena so happy? After laughing for a while, Yelena quietly opened her eyes again. In fact, the distance between them was less than 2 feet, so there was no point in being quiet. Their eyes met, and Yelena couldn't control herself again. She covered her mouth and couldn't help but laugh. What are you laughing at? Hanjin was already annoyed by Yelena's laughter. Nothing. It's just that. I feel so satisfied now, so I want to laugh. Yelena's eyes were overflowing with happiness. Her expression was like a child who had stolen countless candies and was eating alone under the blanket. It was as if she could wake up from her dreams with a smile. Harley was still looking up at the sky. This time, he was finally sure that he was unnecessary. Hanjin was speechless. He really didn't know what to say, so he had to change the topic. He glanced around, and his eyes fell on Harley. Harley, walk around and see if there's anything wrong. After Harley left, he could also say that he was going to look around and leave temporarily. He would come back after Yelena fell asleep. Sure enough, Harley howled his heart, but he had to listen to Hanjin's orders. Just as he was about to leave the magic shield, he thought of something and used very artistic words to test Hanjin's intentions. Master, how long do you need me? Hanjin didn't understand. That is, how long do you need? This was related to his personal special ability, so Harley didn't dare to say it out loud. What do you mean, how long do I need? Get lost. Hanjin was furious. Yelena didn't understand, but he did. He flipped his hand and released a thunder palm, mercilessly hitting Harley. Harley's body was blasted out of the magic shield. With a shrill scream, he turned into a black ball and hurriedly shot into the distance. In fact, Hanjin's thunder palm wasn't that powerful. Harley wanted to use his scream to gain Hanjin's sympathy. The unicorn was originally curiously observing Hanjin and Yelena, but when it heard Harley's scream, it immediately lowered its head and fell asleep. It was said that people could only grow quickly in suffering, and this principle was also valid for magical beasts. What's wrong with you? Seeing Hanjin suddenly angry, Yelena was shocked. She hurriedly sat up and looked at Hanjin nervously. It's okay. That guy is disobedient. Hanjin softened his tone and said softly, You rest first. I'll walk around outside. After all, it's not very safe here. From Hanjin's point of view, he wanted to leave the ambiguous environment for a while. But when Yelena heard it, she clearly felt the warmth of being protected. Okay, come back quickly, Yelena said in an even softer voice. Hanjin nodded, stood up, and walked slowly outside the magic shield. Just like Harley, he looked up at the sky and couldn't help but smile bitterly. He remembered Guevara's words, Yelena is a good girl, don't hurt her. Now he suddenly realized that he seemed to have fallen into a trap, because rejection itself was a kind of harm. After standing still for a while, Hanjin sighed softly. He knew that Guevara would never interfere with his private affairs. If he could get Guevara to speak up, it meant that there was a unified voice within the army. The elves suddenly started a war and occupied their Bite Man, their Black Raven city, and almost made them homeless. The entire army hated the elves, and this could be seen from the attitude of the soldiers towards the elven prisoners of war. Even Alan Sanret, who had been a slave, showed no mercy to the elven prisoners of war. It could be said that even if Sunir and Prudence hadn't married, the soldiers, including Lang Ning, Alan Sanret, and the core members of the ruling family, wouldn't tolerate an elf as their mistress. It was still unknown who would emerge victorious. Now that everyone was preparing for the final battle in spring, there was no room for compromise in the war between the invaders and the invaded. If he still couldn't forget an elf at this moment, it would have a terrible impact on the morale of the army. And beside him, the only one who was qualified to be his mistress was Yelena. Except for a few exceptions, almost everyone could accept her. Perhaps it was because of all these considerations that Guevara was forced to find him. Hanjin reached out and took a few snowflakes. Watching the snowflakes slowly melt in his palm, his eyes grew colder and colder. He then stepped into the snow. He was the lord, the backbone of the entire group. No matter how selfish he was, he couldn't deny that the lives of thousands of people were much more important than his personal feelings. Chapter 328. After an unknown amount of time, Hanjin's figure slowly walked out of the wind and snow. He shook off the snow on his body and walked into the magic shield. Yelena was already fast asleep. Rushing through the wind and snow had consumed a lot of her physical strength. Although she was very excited, she still couldn't help but fall asleep after lying down for a while. If she was a single girl, it would be difficult for her to fall asleep in this dark and empty field. However, Yelena was not afraid because Han Jin was outside. She looked very relaxed in her sleep with a sweet smile on her face. Han Jin quietly looked at Yelena. After a while, he quietly sat on the carpet and began to adjust his breath. Harley, who was exiled, was not so lucky. He kept flying forward. He had made up his mind that he would never go back before dawn. He didn't need a rest anyway. Fly, fly, fly. After flying past the small forest in front of him, Harley's figure came to an abrupt stop and returned to his original form. The two strange red lights in his eye sockets shot towards the west. Just a moment ago, he had smelled the scent of blood. Undead creatures were naturally sensitive to the smell of blood, but he didn't see anything abnormal in his line of sight. The smell of blood should have come from a place extremely far away. For it to be able to travel so far, it could be judged that there were many people bleeding. Should he go back and report to the master, or go take a look himself? Harley hesitated for a moment. His body quickly shrank inwards and then turned into a round bead, flying in the direction of the smell of blood. Harley was different now. He was a powerful undead creature who had once ravaged the Angel of Light. Although the Angel of Light had lost most of its power, it didn't affect Harley's confidence in himself. After flying for more than 10 miles, Harley finally approached the battlefield. With the help of the dim light, he could clearly see that there were creatures of 3 races fighting for their lives below. On one side were the humans, and on the other side were the elves and a large number of orcs. Harley couldn't believe his eyes. The elves and the orcs were 2 extremes. Although they were both relatively weak races, perhaps because they were in the same boat, they rarely had large-scale conflicts. But they still looked down on each other. The elves thought that the orcs were ignorant, rude, and barbaric, while the orcs thought that the elves were too weak, and always thought that they were smart. How could these 2 races fight side by side? Harley thought that the scene in front of him was too absurd. The humans were at an absolute disadvantage. They were fighting and running at the same time, trying to kill their way out. The elves and orcs, on the other hand, were following closely behind the humans. After a slight contact and killing a few humans, the elves and orcs would slow down and increase the distance between them before launching another attack. In the human team, there were 60 to 70 carriages. Some magicians stood on the carriages and fought. There were also warriors riding horses nearby to provide cover for the magicians. However, the elves were riding silver pegasi, and the orc warriors were riding windwolves. The humans were far inferior to their opponents in terms of speed, numbers, and attack power. In fact, the individual strength of the human soldiers was much stronger than their opponents. All kinds of fighting skills bloomed one after another. The strength of the magicians was not weak either. They could even release 9th-grade spells such as Hellfire and Icicle. However, their cooperation was a mess. When Harley saw the Hellfire and Icicle attack the orc warriors in the same area, he couldn't help but feel pain in his heart. What a waste of magic. First, he used Icicle to freeze the orc warriors into ice sculptures, then used Hellfire to melt the ice. Was this a game? On the contrary, the orc warriors cooperated very well. They cut and cut as naturally as flowing water. Although their shiny scimitars were constantly waving, they didn't attack easily. Every time they attacked, they gathered the strength of a group of warriors to attack one person. Of course, because most of the humans were high-grade professions, the orc warriors had to pay a price several times, or even more than 10 times for every person they killed. However, none of the orc warriors retreated. The cooperation of the elves was also very good. Moreover, they were all archers. They could form a perfect charging formation with the orc warriors, making up for each other's shortcomings. They could also help the orc warriors kill the human warriors or attack the magicians on the carriages. They were a huge threat to the other side. Idiot! If I don't help, you'll all be killed by the elves and orc warriors. Harley couldn't help but feel proud when he thought of himself appearing as a hero or a benefactor. He then quietly shot forward while staying close to the snow. Behind the battle, there were hundreds of elves and orc warriors following at a moderate pace. Obviously, they didn't use their full strength. The elf in the lead was a female. It was hard to tell how old she was. In fact, guessing the age of an elf was an extremely stupid thing to do. She carried a longbow on her back. Seeing her people fighting in front of her, she didn't even bother to take off her longbow, which was enough to prove how relaxed she was. As for her appearance, although she wasn't as beautiful as Sunir or Yelena, she was still very beautiful. Walking next to the female elf was an orc warrior that could be called the best. Looking from behind, the orc warrior was more than 2 meters tall. He was very burly, and his black hair danced wildly in the wind. On his back, there was an iron rod that was as thick as a calf. He was riding on a tall, silver wolf, and his extraordinary aura made him look like a lone ranger who was free to roam the world. But if you looked at him from the front, you would be scared to death. His forehead and cheekbones were high, his eye sockets were deep, and 2 white fangs were sticking out of his mouth. Unlike the vampires, whose fangs were sticking out from the top, this orc's were sticking out from the bottom, pointing towards the sky. Coupled with his ugly face and green skin, he looked more like a ghost than a vampire. The wind and snow are getting heavier. The female elf looked up at the sky and smiled. Omar, you have lost a lot of your men. What? You still don't want to fight? Just as the female elf finished speaking, a meteor fell from the sky with a whistling sound, landing right in the middle of the dozen or so elves. The flames from the explosion instantly engulfed the dozen or so elves, turning them into a different kind of fire elves. Shiral, your men are dead too. Why don't you fight? The orc warrior named Omar laughed. This is a rare opportunity for the warriors of our 2 races to practice with each other. The female elf named Shiral said softly. You think so too, don't you? Yes. It's much better than exchanging EXP with sacrifices on the battlefield. Omar nodded. Actually, Shiral waited for a moment. Seeing that Omar stopped talking, she asked with a smile. Omar, what do you want to say? In fact, our 2 races should have abandoned our traditional prejudices long ago. Omar heaved a sigh. We lack the power to resist magic. Many warriors were killed by mages in the war against the capital of elements. They died in vain. What are you mountain giants doing? Shiral smiled. The mountain giants have infinite power, but Omar shook his head. How far can they cast their spells? Before they can get close, the lava and quicksand have swallowed them. By the way, Shiral, how many arrows do you have in your quiver? 100. I haven't fought yet. What's wrong? That's the mountain giant's fatal flaw. Omar smiled bitterly. A long time ago, the mountain giants liked to use huge flail hammers, and 2 of them at that. When they threw one, they could swing the other to join the battle. Later, we beastmen were chased to a barren place by the humans. There were no iron mines there, so the mountain giants had no choice but to fight with rocks. Now, we don't even have enough rocks. Besides, how can we let the mountain giants run around with more than 100 rocks? They can only attack once. I see that your men are all well armed. Then my personal guards. If it didn't have suitable weapons, we would have been wiped out by Grand Duke Solomon. I can understand your predicament. Shiral smiled bitterly. Our situation isn't much better than yours. Damned humans. They reproduce and wreak havoc everywhere like locusts. They've taken over almost all the resources on the continent. Omar said slowly. Shiral, it's too late for us to form an alliance now. In a few more decades, we won't even need to fight. We'll starve to death and die of poverty. Fortunately, my father and your Lord Ampugula have made the wisest choice. As far as I know, you and the elemental capital fight every year. You're the one who started it every time? Shiral asked. Why don't you rest for a few years? We don't have a choice. If we don't fight, what do we eat? What do they eat? Omar patted the silver wolf under him. We can't grow crops in that broken place. You mean eating people? Shiral's expression changed slightly. Yes. Omar nodded lightly. Shiral's face turned pale. She wasn't sure before, but now that she knew that Omar did eat people, She almost vomited on the spot. If there were no wars on the continent, almost every elf would become an artist. They were born with a love for beauty. Sheeral couldn't accept this fact. Haha, I just said that we don't have a choice, right? Do you want us to eat ourselves? Omar glanced at Sheeral. Seeing that this intelligent and mysterious elf leader couldn't control her emotions, Omar changed the topic. I heard that there's another voice among the elves. They believe that they can find a way to live in peace with humans. Their leader is Great Elf Lydia, right? How do you know? Do you think we orcs are fools too? Yes. Sheeral looked away because she was still feeling nauseous. But Lydia can't influence our cooperation. She has to follow the orders of the United Senate. Don't worry. I'm not worried. I just want to remind you. Omar said slowly, the powerful humans have fallen apart. They've been killing each other for hundreds of years. Now is the best time for our two races to rise. If we miss this opportunity to allow the humans to reestablish a great empire, we will completely disappear from this world. You should tell this to the elders of the United Senate. I'm the leader, but I don't have a high status. Sheeral realized that her attitude was a bit stiff. She added, actually, we know what you said. Not only us, but even Dragon City is highly vigilant against humans. That's good. After finding out that even Dragon City was wary of humans, Omar's spirits were lifted and he smiled happily. However, his smile made him look even uglier. Sheeral remembered her mission. She looked at the battle ahead and said slowly, cooperating with you is beneficial for us. In the past, our archers could only hide behind the centaurs. But the centaurs are too weak to resist the attacks of human knight and swordsman regiments. With your protection, we'll be much safer. Omar knew that Sheeral was trying to be friendly. He laughed and said, just like now, isn't it? Ha! Don't worry. Our warriors won't be cowards. They won't hurt you unless they step over our dead bodies. Sheeral turned her head and didn't say anything. Most females were emotional, and female elves were even more so. Hearing that Omar ate humans, her good impression of Omar immediately disappeared. Among all the intelligent humanoids on the Pan-continent, there were few examples of cannibalism. Even in the Abyss world, only the Blood Clan and a few other races fed on other creatures. It disgusted her to the extreme. I've heard a lot about the human lord named Raphael these days. Is he very powerful? Omar changed the topic. Sheeral nodded silently. Your sister was killed by that Raphael, wasn't she? Sheeral's cheeks twitched, and her eyes became misty. I know that your sister has never practiced archery. She only likes the harp and is willing to dedicate her life to art. Even a dragon would be intoxicated by the sound of her harp. How could he have the heart to harm such a pure elf? Humans are really too despicable, too cruel, too vicious. Omar took a deep breath and said, don't worry, Sheeral. If I see Raphael on the battlefield, I'll avenge you. I swear. Sheeral's eyes were full of sarcasm. Do you really think you're Raphael's match? They had known each other for a few days, and they were no longer polite. Sheeral suddenly used honorifics to mock Omar. Sheeral, what do you mean? Omar was stunned. Nothing, Sheeral said calmly. Hilary said calmly. Lord Prudence told us again and again that if we encounter any strange and incomprehensible attacks during the winter, we should run away immediately to avoid paying an unnecessary price. Strange attacks. Omar was more and more confused. Raphael is a magician. He has mastered a lot of powerful spells, but I can't sense any magical waves from them. The attacking methods of those spells are very strange. And forget it. When you reach Fort Maxine, I'll let Lord Prudence explain it to you. So he's a magician. Omar smiled. He was afraid of group magic attacks. If it was a one-on-one duel, he wouldn't be afraid of anyone except Grand Duke Solomon. Don't be careless. Sheeral was a little helpless. If Raphael suddenly appears here, I'll leave you behind and run away. This is the right given to me by the United Senate. Don't blame me then, if Raphael is really as powerful as you say. Omar's smile grew wider. Of course, his face was also getting more and more ferocious. It's my honor to die in the hands of such a powerful man. Sheeral gave up. It was too difficult to communicate with such a stubborn guy. She blinked her eyes. When will your first batch of reinforcements arrive? About a month. Omar knew that Shiral was testing for information, but he didn't care. He would tell her sooner or later anyway. Aren't you worried that Grand Duke Solomon will suddenly attack your Fado city? Winter is our world. Do you know why? Omar smiled proudly. Why? Because Grand Duke Solomon has severe asthma. When the weather turns cold, he becomes useless. Omar laughed out loud. You didn't expect that, did you? A powerful man who is close to the level of a demigod is tortured by asthma every year. Ha! That's impossible. Shiral didn't believe it. Nothing is impossible. In the past, Omar suddenly stopped halfway and stared at the battle in the distance. Shiral also noticed that something was wrong. She hurriedly took out her longbow. The orc warriors that were moving back and forth suddenly flew into the air one after another. A rain of blood blossomed one after another, even dyeing the fluttering snow red. The gale wolves that had lost their masters scurried about in all directions, immediately messing up the orderly formation. A round bead flashed through the ranks of beastman warriors like a bolt of lightning. Every time it flew, it would pierce through the bodies of one or more beastman warriors. The huge impact and the inertia of the beastman warriors made them look as if they had been punched in the face. They screamed miserably as they flew into the air. The snow was getting heavier, and it was nighttime. Only the warriors with excellent eyesight could occasionally see a black spot flashing by, but it was impossible to catch the trajectory of the black spot. Then, an arrogant and noisy voice sounded between heaven and earth. Here, I'm here. Come on. Hillary hurriedly controlled her silver Pegasus, raised her hand, and shot an arrow. A sharp whistle broke through the air, which was the signal to retreat. She remembered Prudence's words, and the scene in front of her was in the category of incomprehensible. Omar was furious when he saw his subordinates being slaughtered like grass. He pulled out his giant rod and rushed forward. To be continued. If you want to know what will happen next, please go to www.chijian.com. There are more chapters. Support the author. Support the original reading. Chapter 329. Here comes a big guy. Harley let out a strange laugh. Omar's body was much bigger than the average orc warrior, and he was also riding a unique gale wolf. Harley could tell at a glance that he was a leader. As a hero, of course he had to fight the enemy's leader. That was why he did not hesitate to give up on the orc warriors that were in a mess and flew straight towards Omar. Omar's eyes flashed with a cold green light. He had shown a complex personality in his conversation with Shira and Rueli. He was a little smart and a little arrogant, but when he was ready to join the battle, he became a silent stone, completely different from the person who was talking just now. The silver gale wolf sprinted forward like a bolt of lightning, while Omar stood motionless. Only his emerald eyes blinked occasionally, tracking Harley's flight path. When the distance between them was less than 5 meters, Omar crossed his hands and pointed the giant rod in his hand forward. The head of the rod was facing the soul-devouring orb that Harley had condensed. Omar's staff was extremely fast, and Harley was shocked. He hurriedly spun faster, forcefully changing his flight path, and dodged the giant staff by a hair's breadth. He drew a curved downward arc and shot straight at Omar's chest. He had intended to turn the enemy into a one-eyed man, but the enemy's reaction and attack speed were far beyond his expectations. He had to change his target. However, the enemy's body was so big that he doubted whether he could penetrate the enemy's chest. Omar's attack missed, but he did not panic at all. He withdrew his right hand and held the giant rod tightly with both hands, blocking the attack like a card. With a loud bang, the soul-devouring orb hit the center of the giant rod. The iron rod, which was as thick as a calf, was bent into an inverted V shape. The bent rod hit Omar's chest, making Omar groan. However, Harley was not much better. He was so dizzy that he even forgot to retreat and was still stuck in the center of the giant rod. Omar reached out and pulled the soul-devouring orb out of the giant rod, holding it tightly in his hand. This was a mistake in his knowledge. Omar thought that it must be a magical prop. Once he controlled the magical prop, the mages hiding in the dark would not be able to do anything. Who would have thought that what he was holding was a strange, undead creature? Harley finally regained consciousness and transformed back into his original form. Wisps of grayish-black smoke shot out from between Omar's fingers, condensing into a round ball and shooting into the distance. Omar was stunned for a moment. Then, he swung his right arm forward with all his might. The curved iron rod carried a ferocious force as it struck the soul-devouring orb that Harley had formed. Harley let out a shrill cry. He felt as if his soul was about to scatter from the impact. Fortunately, his strength had increased tremendously. He was barely able to control the soul-devouring orb to continue flying forward. The moment Harley was attacked, Han Jin, who was adjusting his breath, suddenly opened his eyes. He raised his head and stared into the distance, then reached out and patted Yelena's shoulder. Perhaps she was too tired or too relaxed, but Yelena fell into a deep sleep. Han Jin patted Yelena's shoulder 7 or 8 times before she opened her sleepy eyes. "There's an enemy. I'm going to check it out," Han Jin said simply. "Don't sleep. Take care of yourself." After that, Han Jin released the earth-shrinking spell. He disappeared from Yelena's side and reappeared hundreds of meters away. "What's that?" Omar looked into the distance and muttered to himself. "Raphael must be nearby. Let's go. Otherwise, it'll be too late." Hilary screamed. The name Raphael had become a nightmare for the elves. The more they knew about him, the more they feared him. In fact, Han Jin's strength was not very strong. At least, he was far from the giant dragons in Dragon City who had mastered dragon language magic. But what kind of person was the most terrifying? An enemy that could not be killed. According to common sense, that Raphael should have died many times, but he was living very well now. Furthermore, Raphael had the protection of Mother Gaia. No matter how you racked your brains and set up an inescapable net, Raphael could easily escape from the earth. Hilary knew very well that this problem was a headache for all the elders in the United Senate. They had sent the giant dragons back to Dragon City to ask for help, and even agreed to some conditions that they had firmly refused before. Everything they did was for one purpose: to kill Raphael once and for all. "Go!" Omar paused and snorted. "Hilary, you should know that every orc warrior will not shy away from a challenge." Hilary was tongue-tied. Harley, who wanted to show off but was beaten badly, would not leave either. He hovered hundreds of meters away and controlled the soul-devouring orb to spin rapidly. In fact, Harley's attack power was very limited. He could only exert his power with the help of the soul-devouring orb. But there were few things in the world that could satisfy both sides. When he formed the soul-devouring orb, he would be injured or even killed. The soul-devouring orb spun faster and faster, causing the surrounding air to form a whirlwind visible to the naked eye. Once the flying snowflakes drifted within a radius of more than 10 meters around the soul-devouring orb, they were sucked into the whirlwind and melted into water droplets as they spun rapidly. When they got close to the soul-devouring orb, they were thrown out by a huge force and turned into countless splashing arrows, hitting the snowy ground and splashing up snow and dust. The thunderous sound of the wind grew louder and louder. Omar and his orc warriors could still hear it clearly from hundreds of meters away. Omar's eyes glowed green. He chuckled. It seems that the monster still hasn't given up. Then he jumped off the storm wolf, threw away the curved iron rod in his hand, and stood there quietly, waiting for Harley to attack. "Wait for your death." Harley screamed and suddenly began to move, controlling the soul-devouring orb to shoot at Omar. The soul-devouring orb was only a little bigger than $1, but the whirlwind it created was a few meters wide. As Harley began to move, the whirlwind became twisted and turned into a long tail. The snow and sand along the way were all swept up, creating a sharp line in the endless snow. Omar still didn't move. He waited until Harley was close to him before he pulled out the long sword at his waist. The moment he pulled out the sword, the flames on the sword lit up the snowy ground within a radius of several hundred meters. Omar then flew forward and swung his sword at the soul-devouring orb. Fire Dragon Sword. Hillary was shocked, but she quickly calmed down and calculated Omar's combat power. She then waved her hand angrily. "Let's go." After she finished speaking, she had already steered the silver Pegasus and rushed into the distance. Obviously, she didn't think that Omar, who was wielding the Fire Dragon Sword, would be a match for Lord Raphael. Behind Hillary, there was a deafening noise. Countless streams of air rolled in all directions, hitting the ground, the snow, and the sky. Omar flew out of the air turbulence, fell to the ground, and rolled back a few times. He barely managed to stabilize himself. "Awesome! How delightful!" Omar laughed loudly. The soul-devouring orb also flew in the opposite direction. Harley returned to his original form. But under the influence of the huge force, the skeleton formed by the grayish-black smoke was pulled out of shape. It flew back dozens of meters before it stopped moving. "Damn it, bastard!" Harley shouted again, but his voice was hoarse. Then, a bone staff appeared in Harley's hand. He pointed forward, and a grayish-black shadow flew out of his body and towards Omar. In the next moment, Omar was surrounded by countless shadows. In fact, those ghosts could not affect Omar at all. A true powerhouse's heart was as firm as a rock and would not be easily shaken. Harley did not expect those ghosts to kill Omar. His body collapsed inwards, turning into the soul-devouring orb, and sneakily shot towards Omar while sticking close to the ground. Omar couldn't see anything. He was surrounded by floating ghosts of all shapes and sizes, but his expression was still calm. The moment Harley got close to him, he suddenly shot into the air like a cannonball, breaking away from the ghosts and landing more than 10 meters away. "Trying to run?" Harley laughed strangely. He controlled the ghosts and the soul-devouring orb and rushed toward Omar like a tide. If Han Jin was here, the power of the soul-devouring orb would be fully released. But Harley's time to learn Dao techniques was too short, and he had very few tricks. He could bully others, but if he met a real expert, he would be at a disadvantage. Omar sneered. His eyes slowly closed, and the veins on his right hand bulged. He held the fire sword tightly in his hand. With a loud bang, the soul-devouring orb was blasted out by the fire sword. Harley returned to his original form, removed the force from the soul-devouring orb, and then turned back into the soul-devouring orb and shot inward. But Omar, with his eyes closed, could always accurately capture Harley's position. No matter how tricky the angle Harley chose, the soul-devouring orb would be engulfed by the flames as soon as he got close. After repeating this for 7 or 8 times, Harley was finally terrified. The flames on the enemy's sword were extremely powerful. Every time they collided, he would feel the pain of being roasted. Furthermore, he had not completely devoured the thousands of malicious ghosts, and his body was already showing signs of instability. "Bastard, just you wait!" Harley screamed, and then shot back in the direction he came from. "My master will avenge me. Avenge!" Harley's voice echoed in the snow. Omar sneered and put the fire dragon's sword back into its scabbard. He waved his hand and said, "Let's continue the chase." The elves had already retreated, but Omar was not afraid. In his opinion, the human lord was just SOSO. He had not used the beastman's ultimate skill. The human caravan had already fled far away, and only a few faint black dots could be seen. But the Gale Wolves were very good at running in the snow. Ordinary warhorses could not compare to the Gale Wolves, and their endurance was far inferior. It was only a matter of time before they caught up with the caravan. "Lord Juventus, the Beastmen warriors are catching up again." A magician standing on the carriage shouted in a panicked voice. Juventus looked back. Sure enough, the Gale Wolves were biting them again, and the distance between the two sides was quickly closing. Juventus gritted his teeth and shouted, "Quick! Quick!" The Chamber of Commerce of Isolated Cliff City organized another batch of magic crystal cannons. In order to show the importance of this task, They specifically asked Juventus to personally escort them and also gathered a group of high-grade mercenaries. They were not only sending cannons, but also people. Raphael had just occupied the Holy Crown City and had incorporated a large number of troops. He was in urgent need of talents, and of course, he had to use his trusted subordinates to control the troops. Han Jin used to be a mercenary, and since they were of the same origin, they should trust each other, or at least be considered as one of their own. Their call received a warm response from the mercenaries, because Han Jin had long become the idol of the mercenaries in isolated Cliff City. Joining Han Jin was undoubtedly a good choice. As Han Jin's power grew, they would naturally rise as well. Perhaps they could even become lords in the future, which was much better than licking the edge of a knife. Because the number of mercenaries who responded to the call far exceeded the requirements of the Chamber of Mercenaries. After careful selection, only 100 or so people were selected, and each of them was a powerhouse. Juventus thought that this trip would not be dangerous. The mercenaries were strong enough and had rich experience in surviving in the wild. They were also very careful. There were specialized magicians in front and side of the team responsible for scouting, and a dozen or so warriors in the back to clean up the traces, including the footprints, ruts, and horse dung left by the team. Moreover, they did not walk on the main roads or small roads, but instead traveled through the wilderness. There was no way the elves could discover them. It was reasonable to say that Juventus had already done very well, but something unexpected had happened. They had encountered the Beastmen. In fact, the Beastmen warriors weren't that great. They could always hide if they didn't want to fight. The problem was the Stormwolves. They had a terrifying sense of smell and could smell them from more than 10 kilometers away. This was something they couldn't hide no matter how hard they tried. They had been bitten since nightfall and hadn't been able to get rid of them until now. They had lost more than 30 brothers in total, and each death made Juventus' heart ache. Putting aside the brotherhood between the mercenaries, each of these high-grade mercenaries was the capital of isolated Cliff City. Who could say that some of the mercenaries would not become generals or lords in the future? "Sir, we can't go on like this. They will catch up to us sooner or later," a mercenary shouted. "Yes, sir," another mercenary shouted. "Let's fight them. The elves have already retreated. Only the orcs are left." A magician who was observing the pursuers with his X-ray, I shouted. "Fight! Fight!" Hearing that only the orcs were left, the mercenaries' spirits immediately rose. "Fight, sir!" Not only the warriors, but even the magicians were waving their magic staffs with all their might and roaring. No matter how well they cooperated, the mercenaries were never afraid of battle. In this regard, they were just as brave as the orc warriors. "Fight!" Juventus could only feel the blood in his heart boiling as he roared. After being chased for most of the night, he had been holding back his anger for a long time, and now it finally exploded. Besides, what the mercenaries said made sense. If they kept running like this, they would be eaten up by the orc warriors sooner or later. Although he had been the vice president of the guild for a few years, Juventus still had the spirit of a mercenary. When he said he would do it, he suddenly pulled on the reins, and the horse under him reared up. Then, Juventus jumped off the horse and slapped it hard on the butt, driving it away. He then raised his sword and proudly looked into the distance. The other warriors also jumped down, splitting into two groups. One group stood behind Juventus, and the other on both sides of the mage. Their combination of professions was a bit monotonous. If they weren't warriors, then they were mages. There was only one archer among the hundreds of high-grade mercenaries. The reality was that helpless. Among the mercenaries of isolated Cliff City, almost all of the high-grade archers were elves. This was because they had talent in archery that humans couldn't compare to. The various elven tribes formed a great alliance. This was the first time in hundreds of years that the elven race had celebrated. Regardless of whether they were high-grade or low-grade, all of the elven mercenaries went to Wild Willow City to serve their own race. With different experience and status, one's attitude towards the same thing would naturally be different. If it were Major Domo Gale, he would definitely think of a way to kill the elven mercenaries who left. Every time an elf was killed, the enemy would lose a bit of strength. Not to mention, the elven mercenaries who could survive in the forest of magic beasts were all outstanding. But the way the mercenaries acted was very simple and childish. Not only did they not stop their companions, they even held a farewell party. There were even some who said that they were still brothers, but in the future on the battlefield, there was no need to show mercy to each other. Life and death were up to the heavens. Some people would think that this was ridiculous, but in the eyes of others, this was a man of honor. Even if they died at the hands of their former companions, they would have no regrets. It could only be said that human nature could never be divided into right and wrong. The Beastman warriors were getting closer and closer. The Gale Wolves were running with all their might, and the Beastman warriors were swaying their bodies as they followed the Gale Wolves' charge. They brandished their shining scimitars and pointed their blades at the sky, looking like a shining metal forest. Juventus took a deep breath and gripped his sword even tighter. Some mages raised their magic staffs, preparing to use magic to intercept the incoming tide of Beastmen warriors. At that moment, a figure slowly rose from the ground under countless gazes. Because that figure was facing the Beastmen warriors, Juventus and the others could only see a heavy cloak proudly fluttering in the wind and snow. The charging Beastmen warriors were like a surging tide, and that figure was like an unmoving reef. Although he seemed a bit lonely and small, he clearly gave off a lofty feeling. Just as the figure was about to be swallowed up by the tide, a dazzling green light suddenly blossomed between heaven and earth, and a giant sword more than 30 meters long appeared out of thin air. It swept out from the left side of the figure, creating a semicircle full of flowing light. With just one stroke, dozens of Beastmen warriors, including their Gale Wolves, collapsed in an orderly fashion. Blood splattered everywhere like a red ocean. Countless severed limbs flew in the air. At this moment, cruelty and magnificence merged perfectly in a merciless way. This wasn't a battle, nor was it a massacre. It was cutting grass, harvesting lives as if they were grass. Raphael, Juventus, let out a cry of ecstasy. Although he couldn't see Han Jin's face, he recognized Han Jin's sword. On the arena in isolated Cliff City, Han Jin's earth-shattering sword had not only subdued the slaves in Hogan, but had also subdued the hearts of countless mercenaries, including himself, Juventus. After reading the book review, I have to repeat myself. I won't create a tragedy. Please rest assured. Chapter 3:30. The mercenaries behind Juventus also cheered. Some of the more impatient ones even went past Juventus and rushed forward. They wanted to cooperate with Han Jin in attacking the Beastmen warriors. Juventus, take your men and leave first. Han Jin's voice was still exceptionally clear amidst the cheers and shouts of the crowd. Juventus froze for a moment before reacting. After all, this was the territory of the elves. If they attracted a large number of elven reinforcements, they would be in danger. Han Jin could retreat later, but the group of 60 to 70 carriages had nowhere to run. Everyone stop! Juventus shouted. We're leaving. The mercenaries who rushed to the front stopped one after another, their faces full of unwillingness. However, disobeying Juventus' orders wasn't a big deal, but Han Jin had already spoken. They came to rely on Han Jin, so no one wanted to leave a bad impression on Han Jin. What are you doing? We'll be a burden to Sir if we stay here. Let's go. Juventus shouted again. Only then did the mercenaries turn around and rush back. Juventus whistled. His warhorse had already run far away, but when it heard the whistle, it hurriedly turned around and ran back to Juventus. Just as Juventus was about to jump on his warhorse, he suddenly remembered something and roared with all his might. Raphael, they killed 30 of our brothers. Understood. Han Jin's voice floated over. The next moment, his figure appeared in another place. The green light reappeared, and the dazzling light instantly covered an area of several dozen meters. After the green light bloomed, it was replaced by a bright red light. Countless severed limbs flew into the sky. The screams of the beastmen warriors and the howls of the wind wolves resounded between heaven and earth. This was a cruel world where the strong could do whatever they wanted. Ordinary soldiers would never be able to fight against high-end forces. If a group of ants wanted to kill a towering giant, only God knew how much they would have to pay. And when facing a cultivator like Han Jin, the ants had no chance at all. Even if he was facing an army of millions, as long as he was given enough time, he would be able to fight and leave as he pleased. Sooner or later, he would be able to kill all his enemies. Juventus revealed a sinister smile. He didn't look back and led the group to escape. He knew that Han Jin would avenge them. Juventus wasn't the only one who wanted revenge. A near hysterical voice rang out. "Master, it's that big guy. Kill him. Kill him." Omar coldly snorted and shouted, "Leave this to me. You guys go around." Hearing Omar's order, some of the beastmen warriors panicked and suddenly scattered to the sides. Omar jumped down from the Windwolf and strode toward Han Jin. Although Han Jin's fighting strength was far beyond his expectations, it wasn't a big deal. What made him confused was that the other party should be a magician, but with the green longsword in his hand, the knight's shield with a lion engraved on his left arm, and the fitting and arrogant battle robe, he looked more like a warrior than any other warrior. Was that really Raphael? With a wave of his hand, Han Jin grabbed the soul-devouring bead and threw it behind him. With a series of hand gestures, the soul-devouring bead exploded with a loud boom. Gloomy dark clouds rushed into the sky, blotting out the sky and covering the earth as they crazily expanded and surged outwards. All kinds of ear-piercing laughter, screams, and moans could be heard from the clouds, as if thousands of ghosts were singing an opera. The Beastmen warriors' charge came to an abrupt halt. They could no longer see the convoy, nor could they see what was in the fog. After all, bravery was limited. In the face of the unknown and strange scene, they instinctively felt fear. Omar shouted, waving his flaming longsword and rushing toward Han Jin. Unfortunately, Han Jin changed from a warrior to a magician, and a magician who could ignore the refractory period of magic. His figure appeared here and there, waving the green light in his hand. Every time he attacked, a dozen or even dozens of beastmen warriors would fall into a pool of blood. Occasionally, a few stronger beastmen warriors would be able to dodge Han Jin's attack in time, but that was all. When they tried to counterattack, Han Jin would have already appeared in another place. Also, dodging once did not mean that he could avoid a second time. In the next moment, Han Jin appeared behind them like a ghost, waving his hand and casually taking their lives. Omar became a headless fly, chasing after Han Jin's figure in vain. But he could not catch up no matter how hard he tried. In the end, he simply stood there and did not move, coldly watching Han Jin kill his subordinates. However, his expression was still very calm, and there was no sign of anger. Who would have thought that the famous Lord Raphael only knows how to bully the weak? Ha! Omar let out a contemptuous laugh. When Omar was laughing, Han Jin had already appeared behind an orc warrior. With a light swing of his right hand, the green blade fell from above, cutting down the orc warrior's neck. Then it continued to fly down, cutting down the Gale Wolf below. Two large heads rolled and flew far away. If I kill you first, they will definitely run everywhere. It's too troublesome. Han Jin said indifferently. In just a dozen breaths' time, he had already killed more than 300 elite orc warriors. Within a radius of several hundred meters, the snow-white and blood-red blended together in an enchanting and poignant manner. However, his emotions were like a 10,000-year-old well, without any fluctuations. Now, it's not troublesome, Omar sneered. The orc warrior that Han Jin had just killed was already the last one. Only a few gale wolves that had escaped death were hiding in the distance, howling mournfully. As soon as he finished speaking, Omar's figure turned into a series of afterimages, flying towards Han Jin at lightning speed. The burning sword of fire was pointed at Han Jin's chest from afar. Han Jin pointed his sword finger, and the green light turned into a giant sword that was more than 30 meters long, flying straight towards Omar. Omar was not short. but compared to the giant's sword, he was as pitiful as a fly being swatted by a fly. With a loud bang, countless messy fireballs flew in all directions. The giant's sword flew back and turned into a green stream of light, landing in Han Jin's hand. Omar's figure was bounced dozens of meters away. For the sake of his dignity and face, he leaned his body to resist the strong resistance, so much so that his feet and calves sank deep into the snow. Yes, it's not troublesome. It's your turn now, Han Jin said as he walked slowly towards Omar. His murderous nature was getting stronger, and his heart was getting colder. He was too lazy to ask about Omar's origin, purpose, and intention to collude with the elves. He just wanted to kill him first. My turn. Omar laughed maniacally. It seems like you don't know who I am. Let me introduce myself. I'm Omar from Fado City. I'm the prince of the orcs. Too much nonsense. Han Jin waved his right hand. Rui Rui, frighten the gods and ghosts. Go. A black silk thread suddenly shot out, swimming rapidly in the flying snow, and approached Omar in an instant. Omar took a step back and swung his burning sword forward with all his might. At the moment when the flame came into contact with the black silk thread suddenly twisted. Han Jin's face turned pale at the same time. He hurriedly made a gesture, and the black silk thread gave up on Omar and flew into the sky. The next moment, Han Jin's figure disappeared from where he was and appeared in front of Omar, slashing out with a green light. Omar hurriedly waved his flaming sword and blocked Han Jin's attack. However, as an orc warrior who was known for his strength, he was not as strong as Han Jin in terms of strength. His whole body was blasted away. Han Jin pointed with his sword finger, and the green light turned into a giant sword and swept out. Omar's toes touched the ground, and he flew into the air like a cannonball, dodging the sword light released by Han Jin by a hair's breadth. Han Jin waved his hand in the air, and the black silk thread slithered down silently like a spirit snake, intercepting Omar from behind. It wrapped around Omar's body and tied him up tightly. Omar was so focused on avoiding Han Jin's attack that he only realized when the black silk thread was about to touch him. Unfortunately, it was too late. Han Jin then disappeared from where he was and appeared in the air above Omar. He waved his left arm with all his might, and the Lion King's shield smashed heavily on Omar's head. Although in his own world, Han Jin had almost never practiced martial arts, he had now experienced countless bloody battles. He had gradually matured, not only in his mind and Tao, but also in many other aspects. Han Jin's series of movements were as swift as a rabbit's and as natural as flowing water. They were extremely tight. Omar jumped up like a cannonball and fell down like a cannonball, stirring up countless pieces of snow and sand. His body actually smashed a pit more than a foot deep in the ground. Han Jin's sword finger slashed down, and the green light shot out like lightning, slashing diagonally at Omar's head. The immortal binding rope was firmly tied to Omar's body, and he did not want his magic treasures to collide with each other. Although Omar's head was broken and bleeding, he did not lose his consciousness. At the moment of life and death, his body suddenly flipped out of the pit, and the green light almost grazed his head and pierced into the ground. Almost a quarter of the 30-meter-long sword blade was deeply embedded in the ground, causing the ground to tremble violently. This was enough to prove the terrifying power contained in the giant sword. Han Jin released the ground shrinking spell again and appeared in front of Omar. He swung his right fist forward and hit Omar's face. Omar could not help but let out a shrill cry as he was sent flying. Han Jin formed a hand seal, and the giant sword turned into a green light again. He then moved his sword finger, and the green light shot out like lightning, chasing after Omar. Omar's body and arms were tightly bound by the immortal binding rope, and he lost the ability to move. Only his legs could still move. Seeing the green light getting closer and closer, he suddenly let go of the fire dragon sword in his hand and kicked the hilt of the sword. The fire dragon sword flew out and met the green light head-on. There was a loud explosion, and the flames on the fire dragon sword burst out like a blooming firework. Omar let out an angry howl, and his whole body expanded outwards with the howl. As for the fire dragon sword that had flown hundreds of meters away, he could no longer care about it. This battle had taught Omar a lesson. To fight, he had to give it his all. No matter how amazing a skill was, if there was no chance to use it, what was the point? Hanjin moved his sword finger, and just as he was about to control the green light to attack again, his face suddenly changed. Omar's body was still expanding, and the immortal binding rope that was deeply embedded in Omar's body was constantly letting out cracking sounds. Withdraw. Hanjin formed a hand seal, and the immortal binding rope quickly left Omar's body and shot towards Hanjin. Omar's body continued to expand like a balloon. His height broke through 3 meters, and after a few breaths, he broke through 4 meters. The various parts of the armor on his body, whether they were made of steel, leather, or steel, could not withstand the huge expansion force and broke one after another. Some were even stretched to pieces, and the thick hair on Omar's face and body continued to thicken and grow. Interesting. Hanjin smiled. He did not attack and only watched the show calmly. I didn't have a chance to say it just now, Omar said with a slightly trembling voice. When he thought of this, he felt heartfelt grief and anger. He was only halfway through his self-introduction when he was beaten up by his opponent. However, he had to finish because that was his pride. I have the blood of the golden behemoth in my body. You want to kill me? Ha! 10 meters, 15 meters. Omar's body continued to grow until he finally became a giant monster. Even the fur on his body was almost a meter long, and his sharp and snow-white fangs were even taller than Hanjin's. His hands were close to the ground like a gorilla, and the nails that extended from his fingertips were thicker than Hanjin's waist. An incomparably malevolent and ferocious aura emanated from the monster's body. The breath that came from its bottomless mouth could actually melt the snow within a radius of 12 meters in an instant. Furthermore, with every breath it inhaled and exhaled, it would let out a thunderous roar. When he was chasing the group of orc warriors just now, in Hanjin's eyes, the orc warriors were not much stronger than ants. At this moment, he had also become an ant, a real ant. Hanjin's expression became serious. He was not afraid of anything, but he remembered Guevara's words. The behemoth was known as the king of the land, and the giant dragons had the ability to fly. They should have the upper hand against the behemoth, but in fact, the giant dragons always tried to avoid conflict with the behemoth. To be precise, the giant dragons were afraid of the behemoth, but the behemoth was not afraid of the giant dragons. There had to be a reason for the giant dragons to compromise. If a few of these behemoths joined forces and attacked his army, the result would be obvious. The entire line would collapse. Hanjin could sense the aura emitted by the behemoth in front of him. He had no problem fighting it. He was confident in himself, but he definitely could not withstand a head-on collision. The only way was to fight in a roundabout way and look for an opportunity. However, a group battle was not an individual battle. There was no room for roundabout. Either kill or be killed. Hanjin suddenly thought of a person, Grand Duke Solomon of the Capital of Elements. In the war between the Capital of Elements and Fado City, the Capital of Elements had always had the upper hand. Major Domo Gale had said that Grand Duke Solomon had single-handedly supported the glory of the Capital of Elements. The enemy in front of him was already so fierce, not to mention the Lord of Fado City, Forza. Grand Duke Solomon was able to firmly suppress Fado City. How powerful was he? A scene appeared in Hanjin's mind. A few behemoths led countless orc warriors and rushed toward the Capital of Elements. An old man stood calmly on the city wall and commanded the magicians to attack. Flames, lightning, spinning icicles, and roaring dust engulfed the entire field. In the blink of an eye, the invaders were annihilated. When Grand Duke Solomon was mentioned before, Yelena's eyes were full of uncontrollable pride and admiration, and the same was true for the unfathomable Major Domo Gale. Hanjin could understand Yelena, but he could not understand Major Domo Gale. In his opinion, Major Domo Gale's real strength should not be much worse than Grand Duke Solomon's. Was his respect for Grand Duke Solomon just because of power and friendship? Now he finally understood that the rumors did not overestimate Grand Duke Solomon, but underestimated him. "Do you still want to kill me?" Omar laughed mockingly, and his laughter spread far and wide along the snowfield like a thunderclap. The next moment, Omar suddenly moved. It only took him one step to cross the distance of dozens of meters. His huge fist, which was as heavy as a 10,000-pound rock, came down from above. Before the fist arrived, the wind brought by it had already swept away the snow around Han Jin. Han Jin did not expect such a giant beast to be so agile. Fortunately, he was not slow either. His body sank into the ground in an instant. With a bang, Omar's right fist sank deep into the snow, and the ground trembled violently. Within a radius of dozens of meters, a hazy snow and dust flew out from the white snow due to the violent tremors, like the rising fog in the morning. Han Jin had already risen into the air from behind Omar's back. With a wave of his sword finger, the green light turned into a giant sword more than 30 meters long and swiftly slashed at Omar's back. Omar suddenly turned around and stretched out his palm that was a few meters wide to slap the giant's sword without any scruples. With another loud bang, the giant sword fell to the ground like a powerless tree branch, and then bounced up dozens of meters high, rolling into the depths of the snowfield. Han Jin felt as if he was struck by lightning. He only wanted to test the true attack power of this monster, but the result was far beyond his expectations. The magic weapon was connected to his mind, and if the magic weapon was damaged, he would also be injured. Omar lowered his head to look at his giant claws. There were several cracks on those thick and sharp nails. Omar could hardly believe that his nails could pierce through the body of a giant dragon like Tofu, and that strange magic tool had almost broken his nails. The fog-like-een wind did not have much of an effect. Omar actually caught Han Jin's position and waved his hand downward. As soon as Han Jin released the last of the 3 true fire of Samadhi, the pillar-like nails were closing in on his body with a thunderous roar. It was too late for him to release the earth-shrinking spell. If he used Earth Meld, his upper body would disappear as soon as his lower body sank into the ground. Han Jin could only cross his left arm and control the Lion King's shield with his spiritual will to block the attack. Rich white light spewed out, forming a dazzling light screen. Then, with a loud bang, Omar's fingertips collided with the light screen. The light screen was instantly torn apart, and Han Jin's body flew out like a cannonball, flying more than 100 meters away. He was also dizzy from the shock. Then, he forcefully controlled the surging vital energy, released the ground-shrinking spell, summoned the green light, and rode on the sword beam, flying vertically into the sky. Omar only took 2 steps to jump below Han Jin. Unfortunately, Han Jin had already fled far away. "Come down, coward!" Omar howled. Han Jin smiled and only looked at Omar quietly. For the past few years, he had been re-evaluating the power of Tao techniques. The true Samadhi fire was not invincible. At least it could not cause harm to the giant golden dragon. And the behemoth in front of him should not be as strong as the green dragon's magic defense. He believed that the true Samadhi fire would have a decisive effect. The 4 balls of fire were still burning quietly. Omar caught a glimpse of something out of the corner of his eye and hurriedly looked down. He saw that there were flames burning on his feet. He subconsciously reached out his hand to wipe them away, trying to extinguish the flames. This was a fatal mistake. As the giant palm swept past, the 4 balls of fire had connected into one and had spread to Omar's palm. At this moment, Omar suddenly felt a piercing pain and could not help but let out a shrill howl. Asterisk, 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 while Han Jin was fighting with the behemoth, a bloody incident occurred in the illusion of the temple in Wild Willow City. A dozen elite archers had just entered the illusion and were suddenly attacked in less than 10 minutes. Countless grayish-white, monkey-like monsters inexplicably appeared from the quiet forest. In the blink of an eye, they formed an overwhelming tide of anger and swallowed the dozen elite archers. Before this, the anxious Great Elder Amchula had sent 5 elite teams into the illusion to look for Sunir. To be precise, they were going to capture her. However, after the 5 elite teams entered the illusion, they mysteriously disappeared collectively. The strength of each elite team was stronger than the previous one, but the results were similar. In the 6th team, there were even great elves who had entered the illusion several times and were very familiar with the illusion. However, in the face of the tide of monsters, they could not resist at all. In the blink of an eye, they were torn to pieces and turned into skeletons. Moreover, the monsters were intelligent. When they attacked, more than 1,000 monsters circled to the back and surrounded the entrance of the illusion. The elves had no way to escape. Unfortunately, the total weight of the dozen elves added together was not more than 2,000 pounds. The monsters were not full at all. They angrily waved their bloody bone clubs and smashed everywhere. After a long time, they finally sneaked into the depths of the forest. When the sky had just brightened, Sunir, who was sitting next to a big tree with a bow and arrow in her arms, opened her eyes on time. First, she checked the few small traps that she had set up last night. After confirming that there were no abnormalities, Sunir nodded with satisfaction. Then, she took out a piece of wood and carefully drew a mark on it with an arrow. How many days had it been? Sunir couldn't remember clearly. She only knew that she had left dozens of scratches on the wooden block, and she didn't know whether one day in here was the same as one day in the outside world. She had changed her robe several times, and her jade-like skin, which she used to be proud of, was now covered with mottled scars. If she walked out like this, she would definitely give Han Jin a shock, Sunir thought bitterly. She gently touched the finger-wide scar on the side of her neck that was left behind by a rabbit-like monster. Even though Seth had warned her, Sunir really did not expect the rabbit to attack so quickly. Almost at the same time that Sunir noticed the rabbit, 2 red lights were already shooting towards her. Fortunately, Sunir's nerves had been trained to be as tough as steel. She was almost always on high alert, which was why she was able to tilt her head in the nick of time. Even so, she could not completely avoid the attack. Later on, as long as these white, round creatures appeared in her field of vision, Sunir would immediately shoot an arrow at them. She finally understood that there were no creatures that would not attack her in the illusion trial. Other than the tall trees, all living creatures that could move were extremely aggressive. The only correct way was to strike first to gain the upper hand. However, Sunir was relieved that she did not encounter any monkey-like creatures again. Sunir could not do anything to those little creatures that came and went like the wind, but if it was a one-on-one battle, Sunir was confident that she could take care of the monsters here. The elves had always been known as the rulers of the forest. On one hand, it was because of the complex terrain and the numerous obstacles in the forest, which provided a natural barrier for the elves' long-range archers. If one wanted to fight against the elves in the forest, one must always be on guard against the arrows that were everywhere. On the other hand, the elves had the ability to communicate with nature. Every flower, every blade of grass, and even every tree could become an elf's weapon. In such an environment, one would definitely not be fighting against just one elf, but the entire forest. The forest in the illusion trial was completely different from the one in the real world. Sunir could not communicate with it at all. However, this did not affect Sunir's archery skills at all. In this place, Sunir fully utilized the elves' racial talents. The sharp arrows in her hands could be said to have never missed a target. Every time she shot, she would reap a life. With the sound of the bowstring, the arrow pierced through the air and left behind a faint afterimage in the forest. A huge, colorful snake fell from the tree and landed on the ground with a loud bang. Sunir's arrow accurately embedded itself between the snake's eyes, leaving only an inch-long arrow feather on the outside. Sunir sighed. The venom that the snake spat out was extremely terrifying. She did not want to be stained by even a little bit of it. The snake was not completely dead yet. It was still rolling around with all its might, its thick tail hitting the ground with a crackling sound. Sunir stood in the distance and waited quietly. Gradually, the strength of the serpent became weaker and weaker, and finally it started to twitch from time to time. Sunir still didn't move. A qualified hunter didn't need to be good at archery, but must have enough patience. Sunir waited until the snake stopped moving. After a long time, she slowly walked over. After making sure that the snake was completely dead, Sunir squatted down and carefully took out the venom gland from the snake's mouth. She then smeared the venom on the arrow one by one. If there were any elves here, they would definitely stare with wide eyes and condemn Sunir's actions. She actually smeared poison on the arrow? The elves had archery masters and artistic masters, but they had never produced an expert in poison. The prideful elves did not even bother to use poison. In the past, Sunir had never done such a thing. But now, if someone were to question her, she would definitely ask with a smile, "How long have you been in the illusion realm?" Some large monsters could not be killed with arrows. The reason why Sunir came up with this idea was because she had witnessed a fight between monsters a few days ago. It was two monsters the size of small hills. For some reason, they were fighting. At that time, Sunir could hear the continuous and deafening sounds of collision from afar. To be able to make such a loud noise, the monsters should be quite large. Even though Sunir was mentally prepared, she still took a deep breath when she saw it with her own eyes. What kind of monsters were these? From what Sunir knew, only dragons had the qualifications to be compared to these two monsters in front of her. They were like two lizards that had been magnified countless times. Moreover, the way they attacked each other was very strange. Both of them stood up and used their two thick forelimbs to slap each other. The deafening sounds that Sunir heard came from this. Sunir was dumbfounded as she looked at the four claws that were larger than her body. They kept slapping each other, and neither side seemed to have any intention of falling down. It was as if the other's attack was just tickling them. She thought that even if she shot all of her arrows, they would not be able to do any effective damage to these two monsters. After a while, the two monsters seemed to have gotten angry and were no longer satisfied with just slapping each other. They began to open their bloody mouths and bite each other. Actually, it was not quite accurate to call it a bloody mouth. Sunir estimated that even if she were to stand in the monster's mouth, she would not be able to reach its upper teeth. The length of its fangs was about the same as her height. It seemed that these two monsters had a violent temper. Not long after, they reached a point where they would not stop until one of them was dead. Large chunks of flesh and blood flew out, but it was as if they did not know pain and only continued to bite each other's bodies. Gradually, the smaller monster was at a disadvantage. In some places, white bones were exposed. When its neck was bitten by the larger monster, it finally let out a pitiful cry as if begging for mercy. The larger monster did not seem to have any intention of killing it. It did not break its opponent's neck in one bite. When the smaller monster fled, it let out a satisfied howl towards the sky. It did not seem to care that its body was also dripping with flesh and blood. Things were not over yet. The monster that had just won was so happy that it casually swung its tail. Coincidentally, it swung a large tree. The tree was broken in half, and a brightly colored snake fell from the tree, landing right beside the monster's feet. This snake was probably like Sunir, hiding at the side to watch the show. The only difference was that it was too close. When a monster realized that there was actually someone who dared to invade its territory, it could not help but become angry. It lifted its foot and stomped down. With a poochie sound, the middle part of the snake's body was turned into a pile of flesh. If the monster had stomped on the snake's head, then the following would not have happened. But the fact was that it did not do so. The vitality of snakes was usually relatively strong. The snake in the trial was the same. Even after suffering such a huge injury, the snake did not give up on fighting back. Of course, this was also its dying strike. After being stomped into a pile of flesh, no matter what kind of creature it was, it would not be able to live for long. When I return, I should be able to stand by your side and fight side by side with you, Sunir thought. I don't want to see your lonely back anymore. I can only stay here and silently bless you. I don't want that anymore. Chapter 332. At this moment, Omar had turned into an indomitable fire beast. The raging flames were burning every inch of his skin. His frantic flapping and rolling only made the flames more intense. Omar's eyes had been burned blind. He could not see or hear anything. For him, the world had become a purgatory. No matter where he ran, he could not avoid the heart-wrenching pain. In fact, with his huge body, he could have held on for a few hours. Or he could have just cut off his own feet to save his life. Of course, with Hanjin watching, whatever he did would be meaningless. After learning from Sheila Rueli that Hanjin was a sorcerer, he was not afraid at all. Although the behemoth's magic defense was indeed weak, he had absolute confidence in his combat ability. After all, the range of a sorcerer's magic was limited, and he could rush out thousands of meters in a few breaths. At most, he would be able to kill his opponent after 1 or 2 rounds of magic. Only the Grand Duke Solomon, who was close to the demigod level, could cause fatal damage to him. Later, when he realized that Hanjin was actually a warrior, he was even less afraid. No creature could withstand the impact and attack of the behemoth in a face-to-face battle, not even the Angel of Light. Who knew that Hanjin would release such an extremely vicious flame? When he realized the power of the flame, it was too late. Within a radius of thousands of meters, there were pits and countless deep ditches everywhere. Almost no one could keep calm in this kind of burning. Omar was in so much pain that he hit the ground with his head, scratched with his giant claws, hammered the ground unconsciously, and even rolled around. Although he had done his best, what he did was not to save himself, and he could not save himself. It was just his last venting. Omar's hysterical howls could be heard more than 10 miles away. Even Yelena was alarmed. She released the flying spell and rushed over. However, she did not dare to get too close because she did not want to bring trouble to herself and Hanjin. She could only watch the tragedy from afar. Hanjin maintained a height of hundreds of meters and stood still. Harley also turned back into the soul-devouring orb and returned to Hanjin's bracelet. When Omar turned back into the behemoth, he stopped howling. In the language of another world, this guy had the spirit of AQ. At first, he was clamoring for Hanjin to avenge him because he felt wronged. When he found out Omar's true identity, he immediately looked back at the battle from a different perspective and felt complacent about it. The great and brave Harley actually fought with a behemoth. Even such a powerful enemy couldn't do anything to him and could only watch as he calmly moved away. TSK. Escape, of course. Hale would never admit that he was chased away by someone. Hanjin was also secretly surprised. This had nothing to do with the strength of the magic defense. The vitality of the behemoth was too tenacious. At this moment, Omar had lost the ability to walk because the muscles on his legs had begun to melt, especially at the point where the fire started. The bones of his feet had turned into ashes. However, he was not dead yet. He was rolling and struggling while howling intermittently. Hanjin formed an incantation with both hands and pointed his sword downwards. The giant sword suddenly sank down and then flew vertically towards Omar. With a twist of his body, Hanjin followed closely behind the giant sword with his head down and feet up. His hands were still rapidly forming incantations, causing charms to shoot out and hit the giant sword. Every talisman turned into a stream of light and scattered, and the green light on the giant sword became brighter. Hanjin had shot out hundreds of talismans at a distance of hundreds of meters. In the end, the shape of the flying sword could not be seen clearly. The dazzling green light illuminated the entire land, the gloomy sky, and the snowflakes in the sky. The snowflakes became particularly dazzling, as if thousands of fireflies were dancing in the air. The entire sword turned into a giant meteor, and with a deafening sound of wind and thunder, it fell rapidly and hit the struggling Omar. With a loud bang, countless pieces of sand, stones, and snow rose into the sky. An invisible shock wave quickly rolled out in all directions. The turbulent airflow instantly swept away all the snow within hundreds of square meters of the attack point. Hundreds of meters away, a wave of snow rose more than 10 meters high. Looking down from the sky, it looked like a giant flower was blooming. The earth trembled violently, and a 7 or 8 meter wide crater appeared on the ground. The flying sword was deeply embedded in the bottom of the crater, and even the hilt was submerged. Omar's body was completely smashed into powder by the sword. Countless sparks of various sizes were scattered within 100 meters, and they continued to burn like a sea of stars. Hanjin released the earth-shrinking spell to avoid the turbulent flow. Then, with a wave of his sword finger, the giant sword turned into a green light and shot toward him. "Master, you are so great, so powerful." Harley screamed, but at the same time he told himself in his heart that Harley, was just as great, just as powerful. Yelena, whose face was full of shock, also fell from the sky. "Raphael, what kind of magic is this? Its attack power is too terrifying. It's just not very practical." Hanjin smiled. He wasn't being modest, but it was indeed not very practical. If he was dealing with a real powerhouse, no one would be stupid enough to wait in place and take the attack. He had learned an unforgettable lesson from the vampire Caroline. If he was dealing with a weak opponent, there was no need to go through so much trouble. What was suitable in that world might not be suitable here, and what was advantageous here might not be useful in that world. Earthmeld was an obvious example. For a self-cultivator, Earthmeld was only a low-level escape technique with many flaws. However, this was also the reason why Hanjin was able to master Earthmeld so early. Most self-cultivators knew how to operate the power of the 5 elements, and they could capture each other's breath. Any spell that could change the 5 elements could trap Hanjin alive. There were more than 10 escape techniques in the Strange Door, and most of them were more effective than Earthmeld. The highest level was the diffraction spell, which could make one disappear without a trace with the help of flowing light, and could even travel thousands of miles in a flash. However, in this place, Earthmeld had become the most successful Taoist art. Even though Hanjin already had the ability to release mid-level Earthmeld arts, he was too lazy to waste his energy and vital energy on it, because he already had enough. People always had to change according to the environment, and so did spells. For all kinds of Taoist spells, Hanjin had to summarize according to the characteristics of this world and the abilities of the powerhouses, extracting the essence and discarding the dregs. The sword strike that shocked Yelena. If it wasn't for Omar's dying struggle, she wouldn't have had such an opportunity. That guy is a behemoth? Yelena looked at the flames around her that were still not extinguished. When she arrived, Omar was already tightly wrapped in flames. She couldn't see his specific shape, but she felt that his howl was very similar to that of a behemoth. "Yes." Hanjin nodded. No. Harley's figure appeared. In this regard, his knowledge was much better than Hanjin's. He's an orc warrior, but he said that he has the blood of a golden behemoth in his body. "What's his name?" Yelena asked hurriedly. "His name is..." Hanjin's gaze fell on Harley. Although Harley had introduced himself, Hanjin directly filtered out the nonsense. "I think his name is Omar," Harley said. "Omar." Yelena frowned and thought hard. She had no impression of this name. "Harley, go and find all the magic crystals of the Gale Wolves for me." Hanjin waved his hand and then slowly sat on the ground. No matter when or where, no matter if the battle was easy or difficult, he would never forget to collect magic crystals. This was his foundation. "Understood, Master," Harley answered happily and then flew into the distance. Seeing Hanjin sitting on the ground, Yelena didn't have time to think about Omar. "Raphael, why are you sitting on the ground?" After saying that, she bent down and pulled Hanjin's arm. "What's wrong?" Hanjin was a little confused. Get up first." Yelena pulled Hanjin hard. "But I have to..." Hanjin's green aura was damaged. He had to repair the damage in order to cope with future battles. But seeing that Yelena was having a hard time pulling him, he could only lift his butt and stand up with Yelena's strength. Yelena dragged Han Jin outside and found a place that wasn't affected by the battle. The snow here was swept away by Han Jin's attack, so the ground was very clean. Yelena took out a carpet from her space ring and spread it on the ground. Sit down, you're not a child anymore. How can you just sit on the ground like that? Yelena said, half reproachfully and half coquettishly. Han Jin shrugged. He wanted to laugh, but he didn't find it funny. When Yelena first entered the forest of magic beasts, she also put on airs. After a few days, she reluctantly gave up her modesty. Why was she so particular about it now? Yelena released a magic shield to block the falling snowflakes, then took out a pillow from her space ring. But this time, it was much more natural, and the pillows were closer to each other than last time. Right, where's the unicorn? Han Jin suddenly remembered. Ah, I left it there. It should have run away by now, right? Han Jin felt a little heartache and shook his head. If I had known, I would have killed it. It would have been a waste of a 10th grade magic crystal. No, how can you? Yelena shut her mouth. Obviously, what she was going to say next wasn't very nice. Han Jin smiled and didn't say anything. I'll go back and take a look. Yelena stood up. Forget it. Let Harley go back. You're not as fast as him. Han Jin waved his hand. Speaking of Harley, Harley came. He held a flaming sword in his hands and floated over while shouting, Master, look what I find. Fire dragon sword. Yelena screamed. Her face was as shocked as Hillary's. As soon as he stepped into the magic shield, Harley couldn't help but let go of the sword. From the blade to the hilt, the whole body of the sword was covered in flames. The flames made him feel extremely uncomfortable, and he couldn't hold on any longer. Seeing that the fire sword was about to hit the carpet, Han Jin's hands moved quickly. He pointed his sword finger, and a green light shot out, gently hitting the edge of the fire sword. The fire sword rolled a few times and fell outside the magic shield. Han Jin didn't know the exact details of the fire sword, so he didn't dare to touch it with his hands. Yelena hurried outside and bent down to observe carefully. After a moment, she couldn't help but sigh. Sure enough, this is the real fire dragon sword. God, Harley, go to the place where we were resting and see if the unicorn ran away. If it didn't run away, bring it here, Han Jin ordered. Then he stood up and walked slowly to Yelena. Fire dragon sword? Is it famous? Raphael, how come you don't know anything? Yelena looked at Han Jin in surprise. Master, what about the magic crystals of the Gale Wolves? Harley interrupted. Bring the unicorn here first, and then go find the magic crystals. Can the magic crystals of the Gale Wolves be compared to a 10th level magic crystal? Han Jin glared at Harley. As for Yelena's words, he pretended not to hear and couldn't answer. In the past, he always kept a low profile and said that he was an ignorant noble. Now, this excuse was no longer suitable. Who would believe it? Yes, master, Harley replied. His body quickly collapsed inward, and then he shot into the distance. Yelena's eyes fell on the fire sword again. She hesitated and tried to touch the fire sword with her hand. However, when her hand was only a foot away from the fire sword, she felt pain from her fingertips. She hurriedly retracted her hand. No, I can't touch it. Han Jin formed a spell and then reached out to gently hold the hilt of the fire sword. Although the sword was wrapped in raging flames, it wasn't very bright. However, the moment Han Jin's hand touched the hilt, a bright red light exploded and rolled out in all directions, illuminating an area of 100 meters. The light was even more dazzling than when Omar first drew the sword. Han Jin was slightly stunned. He sensed a strong aura from the fire sword. Then, he put the fire sword into his interspatial ring without showing any expression. Yelena, tell me about this fire dragon sword. He felt that he should cram some knowledge. How did you get the fire dragon sword? Yelena stared blankly at Han Jin. She couldn't believe her eyes. Did the fire dragon sword recognize you as its master? No, I have other ways. Han Jin smiled. Spells of the 5 elements, such as the water avoidance spell, and the fire avoidance spell were not very profound. In fact, the earth evasion spell was an upgraded version of the earth evasion spell. However, the spells in this world often contain comprehensive destructive power, such as the meteorite spell, the big fireball spell, the ice cone spell, the wind blade spell, and so on. In addition to elemental attack power, there was also physical attack power. Therefore, the effects of the 5-element spell were very limited. Han Jin had almost never used it. The two walked back to the carpet and sat opposite each other. However, Han Jin was still rough with his legs crossed, while Yelena was kneeling sideways. Tell me, Han Jin looked at Yelena. During the War of the Ancient Gods, in order to protect their believers, the gods did not hesitate to use their power to tailor weapons, armors, or other magical props for the leaders of their believers. This is the origin of the divine artifacts. Speaking of these things, Yelena said, however, because the war was too fierce, many divine artifacts were destroyed. There were mainly 4 sets of divine artifacts that survived, which is to say, 4 types of divine artifacts. The most powerful one is the divine artifact. The divine artifact has another name, which is law. Yelena's gaze fell on Han Jin's knight's shield. The divine artifact is composed of 6 parts. Your Lion King's shield is one of them. There's also the Oracle Crown, the Prophet's Sword, the Glorious Pendant, the Saint's Boots, and the Light Battle Robe. Han Jin already knew this, but he didn't interrupt Yelena. He just listened quietly. The second one is the Dragon Artifact. Its other name is Divine Power. It is said that whoever obtains the Dragon Artifact will have the power of God. Yelena paused. During the War of the Gods, Dragon God Abel's son, Zayurbal, was killed by underworld god Hamas. Abel was so sad that in order to prevent his son from disappearing completely, he used one of Zayurbal's eyeballs to make a ring, another eyeball to make a ring, a helmet and a necklace from Zayurbal's teeth, a magic robe from Zayurbal's wings, a pair of boots and a shield from Zayurbal's bones, a fire dragon sword from magic crystals, and a dragon armor from dragon scales. Dragon armor? Han Jin asked. How can the dragon armor I may be compared with the armor made by dragon god Abel? Yelena's face was a little red. The difference is too big. What we just got was the fire dragon sword, made of magic crystals? Han Jin suddenly realized. Yes. Yelena nodded. Anything else? The Titan artifact, Yelena said. Yelena said, the Titan armor was made by Shulman, the thunder god. It is divided into 4 parts. The Titan sword, the Titan armor, the thunder god's helmet, and the guardian's shield. It is said that with the Titan armor, one can release unlimited electric magic, including forbidden spells. However, compared to the first 2 sets of artifacts, the power of the Titan armor is slightly weaker. What is the last set of artifacts? The Underworld God Artifact. Yelena said, since the War of the Gods, no one has been able to collect all the other artifacts. Humans are selfish. Who would give their artifacts to others? A disassembled artifact is far from being comparable to a complete set of artifacts. Only the Underworld God Artifact was collected by the King of the Hills, Abraham, in the era of the God of War. Later, Danton set a trap and killed the God of War, Abraham, and the elf messenger, Doreen. The Saint Knight, Gotha, led an army to avenge his friends. At that time, Danton was also seriously injured. Knowing that he was no match for Gotha, he sent a messenger to negotiate with Gotha. As long as Gotha agreed to withdraw his army, he was willing to give up the Underworld God Artifact. However, Gotha refused. In the end, Gotha killed Danton, and the Underworld God Artifact disappeared with him. There are 2 legends. One is that Gotha's friend who died tragically thought that Danton was affected by the Underworld God Artifact, so he destroyed the Underworld God Artifact himself. The other is that Gotha hid the Underworld God Artifact in a secret place. As for which one is correct, I don't know. At first, she peeked at him secretly, squinting her eyes into slits. After a long time, She felt that Hanjin wouldn't notice her, so she was relieved. Yelena's expression was very strange and constantly changed. Sometimes she frowned, as if she was troubled by something, and sometimes her eyes were filled with joy. She seemed to be very happy. It could only be said that the task given to her by Majordomo Gale was too difficult. Yelena had never had any experience in love before, and her life was relatively monotonous. When she left home, she would go to the Magic Academy or the library. When she was tired or sleepy, she would go home and rest. She spent all her energy on learning magic. She rarely even saw the things between men and women, let alone taste them. Modern society was rich in media, and even first love could make people restless, worried, and at a loss, let alone Yelena, who didn't know anything. Moreover, she was a girl. Yelena didn't know what she should do, and she didn't know whether what she did was right or wrong. She was at a loss. On one hand, she really wanted to help Hanjin. On the other hand, she really hoped that Hanjin could become an ally of her father and continue to work hard. She was afraid that she would be hurt if she didn't work hard and let nature take its course. Majordomo Gale's ominous prophecy was still ringing in her ears. What if her father and Raphael became enemies? She didn't want to see a tragedy happen. In the past, she felt guilty. Fortunately, they learned from the elven prisoners that Prudence and Sunir were married, so she temporarily let go of this feeling. Just as Yelena was thinking about this, Harley came back. He was holding a few magic crystals in his hands and slowly floated into the magic shield. Yelena was alarmed. She hurriedly put her index finger in front of her lips, signaling Harley not to make a sound so as not to disturb Hanjin. If Harley had eyes, he would have rolled his eyes. He had been carefully working all night, and he didn't need others to remind him. A faint magic wave came from afar. Yelena and Harley turned their heads together and looked in the direction of the wave. At the same time, Hanjin also opened his eyes. Raphael, someone is coming, Yelena whispered. She was very surprised. The Bite Man, the Holy Crown City, and other areas had become war zones, and people who didn't want to get involved would not easily break in. I know, it's Kurtani. Hanji nodded. Harley. Yes, master. Harley hurriedly threw the magic crystals on the ground, held up the bone staff in his right hand, and pointed it to the sky. A black smoke rose into the sky, very conspicuous in this silver and blue world. Kurtani? This name is so familiar. Yelena pondered. So he's one of Zagun's people. After Zagun died, he joined us, Hanjin reminded her. Yelena suddenly remembered that a month ago, after they triggered the super volcano underground, Kurtini disappeared with his magicians and night elves. She thought Kurtini's wish had been fulfilled, so he took his people and left this area. She didn't expect that he was still in contact with Hanjin. Not long after, a figure appeared in the sky and landed obliquely toward Hanjin and the others. Miss Yelena, we meet again. Kurtini nodded to Yelena, then turned his eyes to Hanjin. Sir, it seems that there was a fierce battle here yesterday. Yes, we encountered orc warriors. Hanjin paused. Kurtini, how many people do you have with you? 5 or 6. So few? Hanjin was stunned. Sir, I can't use night elves. Kurtini smiled bitterly. Night elves are also elves. If you take them out, who can guarantee that they will still work for you? This is a good way to test whether they can remain loyal to you. Kurtini became silent. After a long while, he said slowly, Sir, it's too cruel to do this. Cruel? How can you test the loyalty of your subordinates? Kurtini shook his head. If you really love them, don't give them a chance to betray you. There are too many temptations and contradictions in the world. It's not easy for them to persist until today. Sir, I think we don't need to do this. Hanjin was stunned. After a while, he smiled faintly. Well, I won't force you. Sir, I hope you can understand. Kurtini said softly, Do you know why Sir Zagund always attacked the Holy Crown City? Why? It's mainly because the Holy Crown City is richer than the Wild Willow City. But it's also because of this. Kurtini said, Sir Zagund only trusts us, especially Hazel. Unless Sir Zagund decides to give up Hazel, he can't take the Wild Willow City as his primary target. So for decades, he has been holding on to Dismark. It seems that there are always contradictions among you. Hanjin said faintly, if Zagun destroys Dismark, he will definitely turn his target to the Wild Willow City. Won't Hazel worry about that? How can there be no contradictions? Sir, Kurtini smiled bitterly. Even naive children will be at odds. Haha, you're right. Hanjin laughed. Sir, what do you need me to do for you? Kurtini went straight to the point. Well, you take your people to infiltrate the Black Raven City as much as possible. This is your old profession. I don't need to tell you what to pay attention to, do I? No problem, sir. Kurtini replied. While you're scouting, help me find 2 women. Women? What kind of women? One is called Chi Li, and the other is called Sylvia. Do they have any special characteristics? Sir, we can't just go to them and ask for their names. Even if we do, they may not tell us the truth. The one called Chi Li is very beautiful. Kurtini turned his eyes to Yelena. Beautiful? It's barely a special characteristic. What about Miss Yelena? She's not as good as Miss Yelena in appearance and temperament. Hanjin paused. The one called Sylvia always wears a set of red leather armor and has red hair. She looks like a ball of fire. Women with red hair are rare, and their special characteristics are very obvious. That's easy. Kurtini smiled. Sir, is there anything else? That's all. Sir, I'll go back and prepare. Okay. Both of them were straightforward people, and there was almost no nonsense. Kurtini nodded to Yelena and then released a levitation spell to rise into the air. Raphael, how did you get together? Seeing that Kurtini had flown away, Yelena couldn't control her curiosity. I thought they all ran to other places. Zagund is dead. They have to find a new master, right? Hanjin smiled. Who do you think they should go to? Yelena calculated in her mind. It was impossible to go to Wild Willow City. A small group made up of humans and night elves would be courting death if they went to the elves. Depew City, which was owned by Malith. That was a stupid choice. Malith was now being suppressed by Chesam, and it could even be said that his life was in danger. There was no future for them to go to Malith. Should they just go to Chesam? Chesam was indeed powerful, but to all the female night elves, it was no different from walking right into a trap. Perhaps in a few months' time, they would all become new graves in Chesam's graveyard. Yelena thought about it again and again, and it seemed that going to Hanjin was the wisest choice. But seeing Hanjin's smug smile, she was unwilling to admit defeat. Yelena rolled her eyes. They can become mercenaries. To isolated Cliff City. Hanjin smiled. Yelena was suddenly discouraged. She knew isolated Cliff City's attitude toward Hanjin. They were just short of announcing to the world that they would obey Hanjin's rule. If they went there to become mercenaries, they would become Hanjin's people sooner or later. It was better to go to Hanjin directly. Humph. Going to you is the wisest choice. You're awesome. Is that enough? What are you so proud of? Yelena said coquettishly. When was I proud? Hanjin didn't know whether to laugh or cry. And I'm not that awesome. I always make mistakes. Mistakes? What's wrong with you? Yelena became nervous. Hanjin was silent for a moment and sighed softly. This time I took you away from Holy Crown City. On one hand, to find Chi Li and Sylvia, and on the other hand, to give Jedis a chance. Hanjin's learning ability had always been very strong. The so-called learning ability referred to the ability to draw inferences about other things from one instance. Katini's attitude towards his subordinates had touched him greatly. What chance? Yelena asked. I said it was a chance, but because I was putting powder on my face. Hanjin smiled bitterly. In fact, I dug a big hole and then called Jedis over. I hid on the side and waited for him to fall into the hole. You lied to Jedis? Yelena asked in surprise. I didn't lie to him. He would never lie to me, and I would never lie to him. I don't quite understand. Yelena's eyes showed a confused look. It's a good thing that you don't understand, Hanjin said softly, so that you won't be like me, scheming all day long. Life is too tiring. You are the Lord. Of course you think more than us, Yelena said. Although she didn't understand what Hanjin was talking about, She could see that Han Jin was very unhappy, so she tried to persuade him gently. Han Jin slowly shook his head and didn't speak. If you really love your subordinates, don't give them a chance to betray you. Katini's words kept echoing in his ears. Jedis had been with them for a long time, and no one could find fault with what he did. Besides, there was no fundamental contradiction between the two sides. To put it bluntly, it was just a matter of sharing the cake. If I eat more, you'll eat less. Is that negotiable? What's more, what he wanted was not power, but a large amount of resources to lay a material foundation for his path of cultivation. If Jedis had been indecisive before, then Han Jin's behavior was pushing Jedis in the opposite direction. Was it really necessary? When he set off, he hoped that Jedis wouldn't see through his intentions. Now that his perspective had changed dramatically, he hoped that Jedis would be smarter, so that both sides wouldn't be unable to turn back. Raphael, what are you thinking about? Yelena asked softly. Nothing. Han Jin rubbed his eyebrows. Yelena, Nuremberg of Black Raven City, is about 100 miles northwest. Let's go there and take a look, then go back. So fast. Yelena's face turned pale uncontrollably. Isn't it good to be fast? Han Jin didn't understand Yelena's change in mood. No. Yelena waved her hand in a panic. Then why don't we look for Chile and Sylvia? How are we going to explain this to everyone when we go back? Black Raven City is so big, it's too difficult to find two people. I can't spend all my time here. Han Jin said softly. Maybe you think I'm cruel, but compared to Holy Crown City, many things are more important. What if Chile and Sylvia have been caught by the elves? Kurtini and the others can't save them. Really? Han Jin stared at Yelena. Yelena, you don't seem to want to go back to Holy Crown City? Yelena avoided Han Jin's eyes in a panic, but she still insisted. What if they've been caught? Yelena had to insist. Major Domo Gale had told her that it was a rare opportunity for her to go out alone with Han Jin. Major Domo Gale told her that she must try to make a breakthrough. The problem was that Yelena didn't know how to make a breakthrough. She was panicked and confused, and wished that she could spend the rest of her life with Han Jin. Now that Han Jin wanted to go back to Holy Crown City, of course she would be anxious. The elves are relatively gentle, so they won't hurt innocent human beings. Chile and Sylvia are not stupid. They can't go around saying that they're my friends, right? Han Jin hesitated. Well, let's go to Nuremberg and have a look. If the elves really do harm to the human beings in Nuremberg, we'll think of other ways. The elves are not good people, Harley murmured. After hearing the news that Sunir and Prudence got married, Han Jin always acted as if nothing had happened in front of others, but the pain in his heart was clear to both Han Jin and Harley. Now Harley hated the elves, including Sunir, who made Han Jin sad. Don't talk nonsense. Han Jin stared at Harley. Have you collected all the magic crystals of the Windwolves? Master, you don't know, but the snow yesterday was too heavy. It buried the Gale Wolves, and the bodies of the Gale Wolves were frozen solid. They were even harder than rocks. Harley hurriedly shouted, I didn't slack off. Master. Useless thing. Han Jin stood up and strode away. Harley followed behind Han Jin resentfully. He felt wronged. He really didn't slack off, but he didn't collect all the magic crystals after a busy night. He was really useless, too miserable. I woke up too early today, at 3 o'clock in the morning. I didn't get enough sleep, so I planned to play games for half an hour or an hour to excite my brain before starting to write. In fact, I could play anything, but I remembered that a long, long time ago, there was a game that was released at the same time as Red Alert, Legend of the Sword and Fairy, and Heroes of Might and Magic 2. It was called Armored Marshal, but there was no such game in the world. They were all second and third generations. Finally, I found one in a corner. The game was small, only about 12 megabytes. I downloaded it in an instant, then clicked on the install button, but the machine immediately crashed. I couldn't get rid of the XP system, and I couldn't do anything about it for almost a year. I had no choice but to reinstall it. Everything else was fine, but my word library. Damn, I patched it again, installed all kinds of software, and messed it up. It was almost 10 o'clock. It seems that I can only play Plants vs. Zombies. I will never be nostalgic in the future. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.